Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. This happened in early September of 1991 in Decatur County, Iowa. I was a college kid who thought he knew those back roads better than his own campus hallways. We had a stretch of late summer heat that week, that kind that bakes a gravel road until it squeaks under your tires. And I left class early with a beat-up day pack, a little trowel, and the idea that a low creek would give up a couple of artifacts if I walked it slow. I'd had luck there before, finding a broken base and some chips of chert after a rain. It was the kind of errand you don't tell anyone about because you don't want company. You want a quiet afternoon and the sound of water moving over stone. I parked off a country lane I'd used a dozen times under a cottonwood that leaned so hard it looked tired. The only other vehicle around was a two-tone Ford parked up the hill. Old body style with the fat chrome bumper and the paint split along the body line. Cream over brown, or tan over a darker tan, something like that. Two guys sat on the bumper. They didn't look like farmers hooking up a wagon, more like they were waiting on something. One of them said there was a special deer season, and they were tracking. It didn't sit right because there weren't any permanent stands in that patch, and nobody ran drives there this early. And even if they did, it's not the place you brag about it to a stranger. But I nodded, pulled my cap down, and stepped off the ditch into the creek bed. The creek runs in a shallow cut there, between the field edge and a strip of timber that narrows to a point. That day it was low enough that most of the water squeezed into a channel only a foot or two across, leaving damp gravel bars along the bends. There were raccoon prints in the mud, and one heron feather stuck in a jam of roots, and the sweet, sour smell of wild grapes fermenting. It felt like a normal afternoon. I picked my way along, watching for flakes where the bank had slumped, letting my eyes go soft the way you do when you're looking for edges that don't belong. I moved maybe 50 yards down, maybe a hair more. Hard to say. It was enough that the Ford was just sound and a sliver of metal through the leaves when the sun hit it right. Then the engine coughed and the truck eased up the hill and disappeared. I could still hear them though, and I could feel it, that shift in the air when people get deliberate. One of them walked the fence line east, and the other took the high side, like they were setting themselves up at two ends of something. The way you do when you want to push deer through a funnel. I had the sudden stupid feeling I was the one in the funnel. It wasn't rational, but my skin tightened up the way you feel when you know you're being watched and you don't know from where. I decided I'd had enough of that. I wasn't going to be the idiot who caught a slug by accident because two strangers wanted to play drive on a hot afternoon. The bank to my right had a dirt slide under a big oak where cows used to cross before it got fenced out, and there was enough root to grab if you wanted to climb. I figured I'd scramble up, cut across the field edge, and go back to my car the long way. I'm never going to forget what happened at the top of that climb. I reached up to palm a root, my boot toe dug in, and as my head came level with the flat ground, I saw feet first, dark, wide, with hair over the top of them, and then knees, and then the rest of it. He was sitting against the base of that oak, like a big kid who dropped into the grass after a long walk, back against the trunk. Hands clasped together around his knees, fingers laced in a way that made it obvious those weren't paws. The hair on his arms and shoulders hung in long sheets, not matted in that greasy, wet dog way, but heavy and full, loaded with leaves and little twigs like they'd just fallen from the tree into him. Everything on him looked like weight. Weight in the limbs, weight in the chest, weight in the way the hair lay. I froze halfway up the bank, arms locked, one knee jammed into dirt. I was close enough to see the colors in the hair shift with the light. A lot of it was that dull, sunburned brown you see on late-season deer, but there were darker patches and reddish strands too. and some of the longer hairs flashed lighter at the tips. It reminded me of hollow deer hair, that weird blend of tones that makes them disappear at the edge of the field. This looked like that, only longer. I could see the leaves tangled in it, oak leaves and little bits of grass, and I could hear the faint whisper of it when a breeze slid through the trees. He smelled like the bank behind me. The dirt smell when you turn a shovel into a garden bed for the first time in spring, wet and old and clean. Not the rotten skunk smell people talk about sometimes. Earth, warm earth, and something animal underneath that wasn't rank but lived in, like an old horse stall after you pitch the straw. I was maybe 20 feet away. That puts it in a weird place where it feels like you can reach out because your eyes make it closer. I couldn't fit him into any normal frame. If he had stood up, he would have been into the branches above him and still had room to spare. He had the kind of width that makes doors look small. That's what punched through me more than anything, the width and the way the shoulders sat. Heavy trapezius, if you want to get technical. It made his neck look swallowed, like the muscle ran straight into the base of his skull. The arms were long, with the kind of forearm you see on someone who throws hay bales for a living. Not gym muscles, but dense and real. His face was mostly hidden in hair. That shocked me almost more than the size. You expect to see skin, something to grab onto, an anchor for your brain. Instead, there was hair from the brow flowing down and out, with only suggestion of deep-set eyes and heaviness in the brow bone. Not an ape forehead that slants away hard, more like heavy brows casting darkness. The nose, if that's what I saw, didn't stick out far like a muzzle, more like a heavy wedge. I didn't see the whites of his eyes, not until later, and even then, I'm not sure my brain didn't invent them. The whole thing read as a shape more than facial features, and it made my stomach drop. Because when you can't see a face, you can't read anything. You can't find intent. People talk about fight or flight like it's a decision. It isn't. It lives under you, and when it flips, your body is operating on a plan you don't even remember writing. Every hair on my arms stood up. I felt it down to the backs of my legs. My stomach turned over so hard, I thought I might throw up into the creek. I don't know how long we looked at each other. It felt like a whole minute. It might have been 3 seconds. If he wanted to, he could have reached and closed his hand around my ankle. That's the part that sticks like a splinter. I'd been the one to come up on him, and the only thing between me and that mass was a thin sheet of air and my stupid habit of poking around where I didn't belong. I didn't have a gun that day. I didn't even have a pocket knife with a blade big enough to do anything. I had a trowel and a walking stick and a half-empty bottle of warm water. I realized it in a flash, the way you realize you left your wallet behind when you hit the checkout counter. When that landed, everything inside me fired at once, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I dropped backward, sliding into the creek bed the way you'd drop off a fence. My back hit the bank, my heel caught a root, and I went down on my hip into the wet gravel. I kept my head low, kept the oak out of my line, and crabbed away just enough to break his sight of me. I heard him get up. I didn't see it with my eyes, but I saw it in sound. Leaves brushed. Something heavy leaned, then a low huff like a person bracing to stand. The next noise was a weight transferring, a soft thump that wasn't a stomp, but had authority. Then he moved. Not a deer crash, not the brittle rattle of something panicked. He moved like a loaded cart, picking up momentum without rattling. Big footfalls placed in the right spots. I could tell he angled east because the sound of his steps traced the bank above me in that direction. Within a handful of seconds, he was past me and going toward the road, and a new sound cut in, the crunch of gravel. There's a special sound crushed limestone makes when a heavy vehicle turns onto it with a little speed. This wasn't a vehicle. It had that same brake, the chips grinding and popping, but the pattern was too far apart for tires and too heavy for a deer. Crunch, pause, crunch, crunch, longer spaces than a person would leave because the legs were that long. That series scratched into me so hard, it still makes me sick to think about it. My body recognized it as wrong, like hearing a laugh come out of a mask. That's the moment that keeps waking me up sometimes. Not his size, not his hair, not even being close enough to smell the dirt on him. It's that sound of something that heavy moving across the road like it owned it. I held still like a bug. The creak carried my breath away, and I tried to send my heartbeat with it. I waited for shouting, for the snap of a branch, for a shot. The Ford was out there somewhere, those two guys posted up where they could see something coming through that funnel. I don't know if he crossed in front of them, behind them, or if they saw him at all. Nothing in my memory has the crack of a rifle in it. No doors slammed, no scramble, just the grind of gravel until it faded, and the keys and coins in my pocket ringing because my hands were shaking so hard. I didn't climb back up. I didn't even think about it. I got low, hunched, and moved down the creek the other way, letting the high banks hide me. There's a bend down there where a cattle trail drops into the water and the bank gets gentle. I used that and stayed off the field as much as I could, keeping the timbers between me and anything else with eyes. I came out near a culvert where you can see a long way both directions. The road was empty. The Ford was parked farther down the hill now, hood pointed away, nobody on the bumper. My car was where I left it, half shaded. I got inside and locked the doors like a kid. Sat with the engine off because the click of the key felt like it would carry. I could hear cicadas going hard and a tractor somewhere a few fields over. That normal hum of a late day in the country, and my head trying to reconcile it with what I'd just seen. My hands left mud on the steering wheel from the creek. It was on my shirt too, and I had to look at it to prove to myself I'd been crawling, not imagining. I sat there a long time, long enough to feel the heat trapped in the upholstery cook the damp out of my sleeves. Long enough to decide I wasn't going to tell anyone I didn't trust, because I knew how it would sound. Before I turned the key, I took one more look at the field. The oak was a dark smudge past the fence, just a tree like any other. There was nothing in the open, no crash in the corn, no birds alarmed. I started the car and rolled out, and when my tires hit the gravel, the first few pops under the rubber made me swallow hard. It felt like stepping onto a patch of floor that had dropped out from under you once before. I drove west, even though east was shorter, just to put the whole thing behind me. I haven't gone back to that little stretch since. It's not that I think he's still there, sitting with his back against that oak like a giant that fell asleep in the wrong world. It's that the picture of him is now attached to a sound and a feeling, and those don't fade with years the way faces do. If you've spent time alone in the timber, you know that you make peace with the small stuff. Snakes, strange dogs, the chance of someone drunk and stupid. You carry what you need and you pay attention. I thought I knew what pay attention meant. That day taught me something different. It taught me that sometimes your senses don't even have a file for what they're taking in. Your brain tries to stick antlers on it, calls it a bear, a man in coveralls, a stump, anything that fits, and then something as simple as the way hair shifts in the sun blows up all those labels in a second. The last thing I'll say is this. I wasn't out there looking for anything but a piece of flint with an edge knocked into it. I didn't go into the timber with stories in my head. I met something sitting quietly on a warm day like it had the right to be there, and I didn't. It didn't show its teeth, it didn't run at me, it didn't scream. It stood up and left me the easiest exit it could by taking one in the other direction. You'd think that would make it less terrifying. Maybe for some people it would. For me, the moment I think about when I can't sleep isn't a snarl or a roar. It's his mass shifting from ground to standing, the brush of leaves against hair, and that careful, heavy cross of the gravel. I still try not to picture his hands laced over his knees. That detail is too human and too not human at the same time. The fingers were long enough that they looked like they belonged to something that would climb effortlessly if it wanted, but the posture was pure rest. There was patience in it, awareness. He'd picked that spot on purpose because it looked down over the creek bend and caught a breeze. He knew I was there before I knew he was. I woke him up. I was the fool who stuck his head over the lip of the bank and nearly put a hand on the living outline of a problem he couldn't have invented if he tried. And then the biggest, strangest thing I've ever seen got up and avoided me like I was the hazard. I don't know what happened with the two in the ford. I never heard a shot, and I never saw them again. Maybe they never saw a thing. Maybe they watched him cross and decided he was a trick of heat and distance. Maybe they moved to a different draw and told each other for years that there was a special season nobody knew about. That's part of what makes this hard to talk about. There's no satisfying end to reassure you that you've got it boxed. There's no photograph, no plaster cast, no headline. Just an afternoon that cut itself in half before I topped that bank and after, and the way the gravel sounded under something that shouldn't exist. Even now, decades later, I can't cross a short gravel stretch without feeling the skin on my arms tighten. That little pop-pop under the tires brings the oak back. The leaf litter stuck to long hair, the feeling of being as useful as a rabbit in the wrong place. I don't need anyone to believe it. I don't even need to convince myself. Every so often, usually when it's hot and the creek beds go low, I'll catch a whiff of wet dirt on the wind out by the fields, and it makes my stomach flip like I'm about to climb again. Then it passes, and life keeps going, and there's just one piece of Decatur County I won't set foot in ever again. It ended that fast that day. Standing steps, gravel gone, and I've never been able to explain it. Not to anyone, not to myself. Story 2. It was late August of 1997 in Woodbury County, Iowa. The kind of sticky evening where the bugs plaster themselves to your windshield and the smell of cut hay hangs low over the ravines. I was driving back to the farm with my 11-year-old relative in the passenger seat. We'd run a quick errand in town and were taking the usual way home, that narrow stretch that snakes along the timber. Anyone from around here knows it. Shoulders chewed up, deep ditches, trees crowding so close, they feel like they're leaning in on you. The road jumps over little gullies and creeks and then climbs again. I've put a lot of miles on that route and never thought twice about it. The air was warm enough that we had the windows cracked. Cicadas were going off in the trees. The radio faded in and out when you hit that low section where the hills block everything. I wasn't in a hurry. I remember thinking how the sun was sinking into that orange haze, and we'd get home just in time to bring the last of the laundry in off the line before it got damp again. My passenger went quiet and then jabbed a finger up through the gap of the windshield and the visor. I followed the point. There was a shape crossing over us, moving out of the east toward the west, slow and sure, and it made no sound at all. It was a triangle, not a V like geese, not a plane. A flat triangle, edges clean enough I could trace them with my eyes, even though the light wasn't great. The underside was darker than the sky, not shining, more like a dark thing laid over a lighter thing. I remember thinking it looked like the color of a shadow on asphalt. It wasn't at airplane height, it was low. I've had crop dusters come over the fields with more noise and more fuss than this, and those guys you feel in your chest. This was there without introducing itself. No contrail, no blink from a beacon, no engine spooling, no chop like a helicopter. If there were lights, they were so faint or so tucked into the corners that I didn't clock them right away. It didn't wobble. It just slid along like something that knew exactly where the hilltop started and ended. That's what made my stomach drop a little. How it moved around the terrain like it had flown that line 1,000 times. We kept rolling because that stretch of road doesn't give you a lot of places to pull over, and the little pull-offs there are drop into ditches you don't want to test tires in. Every time the road went into a curve and the tree line closed, we lost it. Every time we came out into a little open, there it was again, still headed west, tracking the lay of the ravines. It slipped behind us once when the road bent hard, and for a second it was not above, but back over the trees to the right, like it had swung wide, and was letting us pass underneath. I couldn't hear it, even with the windows open. You can hear a deer blow from a creek bottom on a still night. You can hear the neighbor's pickup on gravel 2 miles away sometimes. For this thing, nothing. Only the normal sounds, and even those felt pushed back. The road up to our place makes a last sharp turn where the gravel meets our lane. On the right there's a shallow ditch, and beyond that a wall of sumac and scrub and timber that presses right to the edge. On the left is the mailbox and the start of the fence. You have to slow down, because if you take it fast, you'll slide the back end. I took it like I always do. The triangle had dropped behind the trees again, and I thought we'd lost it for good. My passenger had his hand white-knuckled around the handle on the door, not talking, just looking all around like he couldn't decide what mattered most. We were halfway through the curve when something hit the passenger door. I felt it in my feet on the floorboard and all the way up into my jaw. It wasn't a little tap, it was a full shoulder check. The handle on the inside rattled. The window glass thrummed. I instinctively braked because that's what you do when the car lurches sideways for no reason, and the sudden stop made the belts grab, and my passenger flung an arm to brace against the dash. In the wash from the headlights, right there at the edge of the right headlight spill where the ground falls into the ditch, I saw it. I don't have pretty words for it. It looked like a hyena that hit its growth spurt in the wrong place. Low and packed with muscle across the shoulders, back sloped like it was made to chew and brace with the same motion. The fur wasn't one color. It was patchy, dark and light mottled together like dirty straw and burnt wood. The muzzle was short, not like a shepherd's long snout. The mouth was open enough that I saw teeth pick up the headlight, thick and blunt toward the back and long and nasty in the front. The eyes were the worst. They were red, but not the way an animal's eyes backshine red when you catch them at the right angle. These were like someone held 2 small red flashlights just behind the sockets. That's exactly how it read through the glass. 2 hot points, steady, not flicking away. It moved along the ditch tight to the car, a heavy lope that didn't match the size of the ditch. I shouldn't have been able to see shoulders moving like that in such a tight space, but it ate the ground beside us like the ground didn't matter. The sound it made through the metal was bad. It came up through the door as a vibration more than a roar, like a growl that grabbed the sheet metal and used it as a drum. It didn't jump. It didn't put paws up on the door. It kept low, and for 1 second its head was level with my passenger's shoulder, and those red lights slid through the glass at us, and my insides went cold in a way I still can't describe. I don't remember the exact words that came out of me. They weren't useful. My hand had gone for the shifter, and then for the wheel all at once. My foot found the gas harder than I meant. The car pitched forward, and the thing at the door peeled off, like it had decided it was done with us. I saw the ditch grass flatten and then spring back as it cut across at an angle into the trees. It didn't crash through brush like a deer. It threaded into it with that same low, rolling movement. And then it was gone. No tail that I noticed, no long ears, just a compact block of something built to take more than it gave. We shot out of the curve and up our lane in a scatter of gravel. My heart was going so hard that I could taste metal at the back of my mouth. My passenger had both hands clamped on his legs and wasn't looking out the window anymore. I kept thinking I should turn the radio up, like sound would make this make sense. I didn't touch it. The night felt too thin to lay anything on top of it. When the yard opened up, we didn't even make it to the house before both of us and the car sort of rolled into stillness, because there it was above the back pasture, that same triangle. It was hanging there like it had stopped to wait for us. 300 feet up, maybe a hair lower, close enough that it looked wrong against the stars. It was just sitting above the low spot near the creek, not wobbling, not tilting, not fighting for its place like a helicopter does, even when it's trying to hold. It didn't stir the trees under it. It was the same flat dark as before, a shade that swallowed the sky behind it. If there were lights, They were tucked under at the corners, soft and not enough to touch the ground. The entire family came out without me having to call. Turns out they'd heard the car come up the lane like the devil was chasing it, and they were already on the back steps, watching the sky when we screamed in. It was one of those dumb, domestic moments that stands out in the worst times. Porch light open, screen door half closed, someone holding a dish towel twisted in their hands. I think a dog barked twice and then cut off like it had to swallow something. Everyone looked up because you couldn't not. Every person there saw it the same way. No one had to ask for a second look to agree on the shape. No one had to argue airplane or drone or anything else. We all stood there with our necks craned and waited for it to do something other than exist. It didn't rush away. It didn't tilt and flash. It sat. Minutes, 3, 5, 10. Time does a dumb stretch in moments like that. It was long enough for me to pop my door open and step out, long enough for me to put my hand on the passenger door and feel the dent with my palm. The metal was warm, and there was a crease right behind the handle that hadn't been there before. A real one, not a rub from a branch. There were 2 lighter scuffs in the dust on the lower panel, like something rough had skimmed it. No clean claw marks, no fur stuck, just damage, and the smell still clinging to the crack around the glass. Wet dog crossed with mud, and something sour that sat high in the nose. I looked at my relative and saw that he was following the triangle with his eyes, but not blinking much. He wasn't crying. That made it worse. Nobody talked big. Stories get loud later, I know, but that night nobody had it in them. It was the same tight, small questions and a lot of standing perfectly still because motion felt like it would break whatever held that thing in the air and bring it down on us. The triangle finally moved. It didn't build speed the way you expect, no easing into it. It went from still to a slow, steady slide, like it had been on a track we couldn't see, and someone slid it along with 2 fingers. West, over the line of trees, over the ravine we'd just driven along, a gentle glide with no change in height. Then it was out past the far windbreak, and the first noise of the night that stood out to me was the cicadas coming back up in my ears, like I'd turned my head to a different room. We went inside because standing under that felt stupid. The house felt like a shell, not really a barrier, but it was something to sit in and breathe. Hands were shaking in small ways. No one wanted water, but everyone found something to hold. I walked back out after a minute to look at the door again because my brain likes proof. The dent was there, the crease was there, the little dust scuffs were there. And when I ran my fingers lightly along the lower door, my fingertips came away with a faint, greasy feel that didn't come from our road dust. It smelled like the ditch after heavy rain. Not dead, just wrong for metal. I wiped my hand on my jeans and felt stupid for acting like that mattered. That was it for the sky show. We never heard a helicopter or a siren or noise chasing it. It just eased off and was gone. The whole thing took place in that thin slice between late evening and full dark. If you look at a clock, it was probably less than half an hour from the first sight of it to us standing in the yard gaping. The part at the curve was seconds. That's the part that turned the rest into something I can't file away neatly. You can tell yourself a triangle is some air guard thing that went off course, or some test we have no business knowing about. You cannot tell yourself a hyena-faced thing hit your car in rural Iowa because it made a mistake crossing a road. The kid didn't sleep right after that. Not that night, and not for a lot of nights. I know you said not to stretch this over days, so I'll keep it simple. Faceless heads, hands he didn't like, wouldn't talk about it beyond that. He still won't ride that way with me. I don't push it. I take the longer loop now when I have to go, even if it means hitting town from the other side. That curve sits in my chest like a lodged bone. I've pulled deer out of ditches. I've chased cattle that blew through fences. I've had feral dogs circle a truck when they're lean and looking for trouble. I know the way weight feels when it hits metal. You can tell the difference between a branch that snaps against the door and something alive that pushes into it. That push came with intent, not some kind of let's flip the car, just a you're in my lane kind of shove. There are people who will line it up nice and tidy and call it a misseen coyote or dog gone wrong in the light, some bear from who knows where, some neighbor pulling a prank. Fine. I was there. I saw the eyes through the glass, and the eyes did not take the light from me and throw it back. They glowed at me, red like a tail light without the lens, I don't have a name for that, and the triangle. I can't make a list that ties a hovering triangle that low over our back pasture to a thing with a hyena's shoulders in our ditch. I don't like people who mix these things because it sounds like a movie. But that was one evening, one drive, one yard, all at once. The fear isn't a general unknown. It's the specific feeling of being stuck between something impossible above me and something impossible beside my door. The air felt thin. The world felt rearranged by an inch in every direction. Sometimes, when I'm out near the mailbox, I catch myself shifting my weight in that curve, like my body remembers the hit. The door still carries that crease, even after I hammered it from the inside and painted over the worst of it. If the sun hits the panel right, you can see the line where the metal folded. It's a dumb little proof, but it's there. I know this sounds like the kind of pile-on post people roll their eyes at. It wasn't like that. It didn't have drama. No one screamed movie lines, no chase, no confrontation with bravado. Just a quiet road, a silent thing in the sky, a shove at the passenger door, and a yard full of people holding their breath while something hung over the pasture for longer than made sense, and then drifted away like it had decided we were beneath its effort. I still hear the dull thud when my brain lets me replay it. It's a flat sound, not a clatter, followed by the grind of my own brakes because I hit them without meaning to. And every time I remember those red eyes sliding across the window, it makes the hair on my arms stand up the same way it did then. We were dead center between what flew and what crawled, and then, as quick as it started, it was just gone. The night went back to normal like someone flipped a switch. I haven't been able to explain that to anyone, not then, not now, and it won't leave me alone. Story 3. July of 1999, Dallas County, Iowa. We were 4 kids, fresh out of our first year of high school, and thought camping in the woods behind my house made us brave. It wasn't far, just past the back fence, down a little rise where a runoff creek cuts a shallow scar and the trees finally start to close in. My parents liked us back there because they could still see the glow of our fire through the leaves and hear us if we got stupid. We weren't supposed to be stupid. We set up a little ring of stones with a couple of bricks scrounged from the shed, dragged a timber pallet for a bench, and jammed tent stakes into dirt that didn't want to hold anything. The ground there is a mix of roots and old leaf litter and hardpan. You learn it when you try to drive a stake and it hits something that feels like bone. It was hot that week. Thick Iowa heat, the kind that sticks inside a tent and turns the nylon into a wet balloon. The soybeans in the field next to our place were high, the corn across the road higher, and the air carried that green, sweet dust smell you only get in late July. We started too early. The sun was still high when we had the tent up. Cheap Walmart dome, bright blue and gray, and the cooler sitting crooked because of a root. We brought a stupid mix of food. Hot dogs, a loaf of white bread, grape jelly, a half bag of apples, a container of cookies, a couple of full-size candy bars because we thought we'd want them around midnight, and some fruit punch I swear was mostly sugar. I had a 2D-cell flashlight with a weak yellow beam. Someone else brought a little lantern that ran on propane and made a soft hiss like a bug. That lantern turned the inside of the tent into an oven, so we hung it in a low branch instead. We measured that branch with my dad's tape because we'd argued whether we needed the step stool to reach it. Just under 7 feet. That detail matters later, and I know it sounds like a neat little detail to remember, but that's why it stuck. We measured it, we joked about it, we taped it and said it out loud. We burned hot dogs until the skins split and the grease popped, melted marshmallows, did the usual. Everything smelled like a fair. We weren't thinking about animals because it's Siouxland, and you see raccoons and opossums all the time. Our dog at the house would bark at coyotes once in a while, but they stayed in the drawers across the fields. The woods behind our place were just that. Ordinary timber, deer trails, squirrel nests, the occasional set of eyes in a flashlight beam. It was the kind of place you brought a BB gun and a pocket knife as a kid and came back with dirty shoes and ticks. Not scary. We let the fire burn down toward dark. Crickets took over, a barred owl did that who cooks for you call far off, and a pair of bats worked the edge of the trees like they owned it. Around when the sky was more ink than blue, we shoved into the tent. The nylon had that plastic smell, and the floor stuck to my knees when I crawled in. The pallets creaked outside when we shifted around inside because the sound bounces weird through leaves. We tossed the leftover bread into the bag without sealing it and left the bag near the cooler. The apple cores we threw at the base of a tree on the edge of camp. The candy bars sat open on the pallet because we were going to eat them later. If that sounds dumb, it was. We were kids. The fire was a dull red ring with a couple of glowing sticks. The lantern we'd hung low above it flickered just enough to show the trunk in front of us, then sputtered and died because the little bottle ran out. Inside the tent it was all shuffling and quiet, laughing, and then the old problem of too many limbs and not enough flat ground. My relative's sleeping bag got pushed against the zipper, and we had to slide it back so we could open the door if we had to. I remember the air tasted like bug spray and sugar. Sweat stuck my hair to my forehead. Someone kept tapping the side of the tent with their foot, and it made that papery thrum that always feels like fingers, even when it's you. The first weird thing wasn't the sound, it was the smell. It came through the mesh along the top like a slow leak. Rotten egg is what everyone jumps to because it sits at the front of your brain. This had that stink, sulfur, but also a wet basement thing, like being nose to board on the damp stairs going down to the cellar after a rainstorm. It wasn't skunk. Skunk wraps around your head and stings your eyes. This climbed into the back of your throat and made you swallow hard to keep your stomach calm. It wasn't there and then it was, and once it was there, it was everything. Right after the smell, the brush outside clicked. Not a scattered rustle like a small thing. It was a single deliberate noise, like something putting weight into a spot it picked. Then another, a few feet off, and the low grunt that came with it was just plain wrong. Not a pig, not a deer blow through their nose and stomp and go. This was a throat noise, short and heavy, like someone clearing a heavy chest. We went silent, all of us. We weren't telling each other to be quiet. We just locked up. I could hear the little seams of the tent fabric shift with the breeze. I could hear the tiny zip pull on the door, toggling against its slider because someone was shaking a little. The crickets outside cut off. That's what yanked at me more than my own fear. The world outside shrank to nothing. No bug song, no owl. Even the leaves stopped moving. I didn't know air could feel heavy in my ears until that second. I reached for the zipper and slid it up just a hair, slow enough that it sounded like sand on a saw. The mesh showed a single slice of dark where the lantern had been, the tree trunk's shape like a deeper shadow against shadow. The breathing outside shifted. It didn't speed up. It got quieter, or maybe it moved a step, so the trunk took it from us. But I still felt it like a hand on my spine. It was close. Too close. We were 4 feet from the door, and whatever it was stood just beyond the edge of our little rectangle of cleared ground. I opened the zipper enough to push it aside. If you've camped in woods where the canopy closes, you know how dark can be a solid thing. My eyes were already wide and useless. I waited a beat for them to scrape what they could, and then I saw the silhouette move where the trees thin out and the creek bank starts. It wasn't coming at us. It was moving away, stepping through a line of saplings we had stomped down earlier. The first thing that registered was the height against that little branch. It was the branch we had measured earlier in the day, the one we hung the lantern on, just under 7 feet. The top of its head came into that space, and the hair brushed the underside of the branch. It didn't bang into it. It didn't duck. It slid under, and the hair lifted against the bark like it was part of the tree, and then fell again. The hair wasn't shaggy like a wet dog. It was longer down the back, with a reddish cast when it moved. Most of the time it looked dark brown, but when the dim light from the fire pit or the last of the sky hit it, there were auburn streaks. Its back made a shape I'd never seen on a person, wide across the shoulders, thick through whatever the part under the neck is, and down to a cross at the waist that wasn't narrow like a bodybuilder, but it didn't taper like a fat guy either. The arms hung too long. I could see them swing when it stepped, and the hands looked big enough to cover a dinner plate. Not a guess. Not a maybe they were big. They were big. The fingers looked thick. I didn't see nails. I didn't see skin. I saw hair on hair, and the shift of muscle underneath when it moved. The steps were careful, which made it worse. It wasn't banging around like it didn't care. It put its foot down with this slow surety that said it had no interest in making noise. That's what my brain kept repeating while my body tried to figure out whether to run or stop breathing. It didn't want to scare us. It didn't want to alert anything. Everything about it said it wanted to slide out of there as quiet as it had come. It was big enough that quiet still had mass. Each footfall had this soft ground shove to it, like the earth had to make room. Not a stomp, not a crunch, a push. We backed away from the door at the same time without talking. I remember my calves bumping into a pile of our stuff, the cooler scraping my ankle, the taste of warm Gatorade that had spilled from somewhere finding my tongue because my mouth had gone that dry. We let the zipper drop, and for a minute we sat in that tent breathing like we'd never learned how. No one wanted to be the first to say anything. We didn't want to set off the world again. After a while, the crickets flickered back like a distant radio station turning up. That stupidly made me bold, or just embarrassed, and I unzipped the door all the way and crouched out because I couldn't stand not knowing where it was. The fire pit had a halo of embers. You could see the edges of camp, our pallet, the piled rocks, the cooler, the bag of bread tipped over like it had been kicked. There was a sweet smell pooled in that space that I noticed for the first time because the other stink had been so loud. Marshmallow sugar, jelly drying on the corner of a paper plate, the bruised apple smell from where we'd thrown cores. The bag with the cookies was open, and 2 of them were on the ground, one smashed into dirt, one with a chunk gone like it had fallen and gotten stepped on. It doesn't prove anything. It's just what it looked like. I spun the flashlight across the edge where the trees start and lit up a line of broken grass and bare ground. The creek was barely a trickle this time of year, and the bank holds prints after a rain, but it hadn't rained. I found disturbed leaf litter and the sort of shallow, wide ovals on the path where we had stomped it flat earlier. Nothing that would satisfy anyone with plaster and an opinion. But I could trace the way it moved in my mind anyway, the way it had picked the line where the shadows are thick, the spots I follow when I don't want briars catching my legs. We sat around the rekindled fire after that because if you don't know what to do, you put light between you and the dark. We did lazy, nervous jobs. One poked the coals, one stacked sticks, one pretended to adjust the tent stake that didn't need adjusting. I felt stupid saying it out loud, but I said perk will attract animals, and maybe we should pack the food up. We did. We tossed the apples into the cooler and threw the bread back in the bag like that would fix anything. The sweetness had already soaked into the air and the dirt. Far out past the tree line, something moved again. Not a little rustle. It was that same low, steady movement. Then a pause. Then a long inhale that wasn't ours. And then it broke into a run. It did not come toward us. It took off along the draw to the right like something had spooked it sideways. What made my skin try to crawl off my bones was the cadence. Not 4 feet, not the slap-slap of a deer, not the clap of a turkey. 2 beats, heavy, smooth, with this maddening rhythm that made it sound like it had more leg than it needed and could eat up ground without showing off. It covered distance fast, too fast for someone crashing blind through brush. You could hear the steps land in the right places when you know a place. There's a downed ash with a slick trunk, a gap, a root that catches your toe. It hit the gap, not the trunk, not the root. Then the sound slid away into where the creek bed bends, and we sat there with our heads cocked like dogs, listening to our own hearts pound and the echo of something big just trying not to be there. That was the part that did me in. The run wasn't a charge, it was a bolt away. That told me it had been as on edge as we were. I always thought the fear comes from being hunted. I learned that night the other fear is worse. When you realize 2 living things are equally scared of each other, and you have no idea what either one of you will do if you get cornered. I have no shame saying I went cold in a way that made my fingers go stiff. For a second it felt like my chest forgot how to loosen for an inhale, and all I had was the Titan. We put the fire up high after that, fed it until it threw enough light that the first line of trees lost their shapes. The smell came and went like someone waving a heavy towel. The crickets thinned when the wind shifted and then came back. We didn't try to be brave, we just sat. The house lights were faint through the trunks uphill, and it should have made me feel safe, but it made me feel like I had a door I couldn't use without turning my back on the dark. Time got weird. It wasn't late. It felt like forever. If I had to pin it, I'd say it was close to midnight when we first smelled it, and not even an hour later when it ran. But the minutes stretched and shrank until they didn't make sense. We finally decided the tent felt worse than the open, which is funny because the tent is supposed to be shelter. It felt like a bag we would zip closed around ourselves, and then what? So we dragged the bags out and sat with our backs toward the fire, eyes on the dark. Every twig snap made us twitch. Somewhere a branch slowly rebounded, as if something big had just let it go. I couldn't find it with the light. I kept seeing that back in my head anyway, hair brushing the measured branch, those big hands that swing. The last thing that happened was nothing. I know that sounds dumb. The air lifted. The smell dropped like someone had walked away with it. The bugs cranked back up to full. The owl started again, same who cooks for you call, and the normal shape of a Midwestern night put itself back together around us, like pieces snapping back into place. We didn't talk about going inside. We didn't talk about staying. We just stayed, because moving felt like a choice too big to make. We watched the spot where the tree line opens to the creek, until the idea of a shape there was just my brain wanting something to look at. I've run through a lot of animals in my head since then. If you've lived in Dallas County long enough, you've seen badgers, you've seen dogs gone feral, you've seen coyotes, you've seen a farmer's escaped hog where it shouldn't be. None of those wear that shape, that height against a branch you measured with your hands, that arm length that lets the fingers hang low like they have a different job than ours. It didn't huff off like a bear, because we don't have bears, and I've watched videos since and the movement is wrong. It didn't feel like a person in a suit because the air shifted with it like mass does, and the careful way it moved said it knew how to move there. But the biggest thing, the thing that still hits me first when I think about it, is how we smelled it before we saw it. Like it arrived nose first, like the body came after. That order messes with me. Your nose tells your brain panic before your eyes get to argue. We packed up in the morning like we'd done something normal. The tent was slick with dew inside and out, and everything smelled like smoke and sugar and that other stink that clung to the cloth. The bread bag had a tear we hadn't seen, maybe us, maybe not. There were prints again, the same shallow tears in leaves that proved nothing but insist anyway. I wanted to find something obvious, a print with toes, a hair on a branch, anything you could point at. There wasn't in a way that would satisfy anyone who wasn't there. What I have is a branch we measured, a back that brushed it, a smell that shoved itself down my throat, and the sound of a run that told me the thing we saw wasn't a spirit or story. It was a heavy, breathing life that wanted out as bad as we wanted it out. I still don't like sleeping in that tent. I kept it for years. It kept the smell in the seams no matter how long I left it in the sun. If I stand at the edge of those trees, I still see the little tunnel of dark toward the creek and feel the same pull in my stomach. It's not a story I trot out at parties. It doesn't come with a punchline or a sketch that makes people clap. It sits there shaped like a knight that breaks in half, before the zipper and after. I can still feel my hand on that little metal pull, the mesh giving under my knuckles, the knight folding in. And then, as quick as it started, it was done. One last steady drum of steps fading along the draw, bugs biting back into the air, and nothing left but heat and breath and a branch we all looked at without saying why. I can't explain it. Not then. Not now, and it still makes the hair lift on my arms as if it's happening again and stopping mid-stride, leaving me hanging in the same place it left us, waiting for a sound that doesn't come back. Story 4. Winter of 1977, Marion, Illinois. I was 10 years old and sleeping in the front bedroom of my grandmother's house because the blizzard had made everything feel smaller and safer if we all stayed under one roof. The town was quiet in a way I had never heard before. Snow had piled up along the curbs and swallowed the steps. The plows hadn't made it down our little street yet. Out front, the hedges were just mounds, the porch rail a soft hump with only the tips of the posts showing. The window in that bedroom was old single-pane glass with a storm window snapped on outside. Frost had crawled up the corners earlier in the evening, those little fern patterns that look like they're alive, even though you know they're just cold and wet meeting wood and glass. The house had its own smell. Starch from the laundry, old cedar from the closet, a little thread of the gas heater that sat low in the hallway and clicked when it cycled. The floorboards ran lengthwise the whole front of the house, and when the furnace pushed hot air, the boards would warm and pop a little. It was the kind of sound you forget about until you sleep somewhere else and miss it. That night, after we all pretended not to be excited that school was closed and nobody had to go anywhere, I got tucked into that front room with a stack of quilts that had weight. Not like a comforter, real weight. They smelled like the cedar chest. The curtains were heavy too, a kind of itchy fabric that kept the draft from wiggling the edge of the covers. I lay there awake longer than I wanted to. It wasn't nerves in a bad way. It was that weird calm you get when snow wraps the outside and the house becomes your whole world. The storm had slammed us earlier, then settled into a steady quiet, so what was left was the hum of heat and the occasional ping of ice sliding off the eaves and dropping into the drift below. The clock in the kitchen had a tick you could hear in the hall if everything else stopped. Now and then, I caught it. Our dog wasn't with us. He stayed with my parents at our place a couple streets over, but I still listened for his nails out of habit and kept forgetting he wasn't there. The world outside the front window was that old streetlight glow from the corner, but the snow had swallowed the light enough that it felt dimmer, lower, like it had sunk into the drifts. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I didn't look at a clock, but I know it, the way you know the shape of the night. I woke up from that kind of half-sleep where your body is asleep and your ears are not. There wasn't a big let-up. There wasn't any bang or crash first. It was like being lifted up out of a warm deep and dropped straight into awareness. What hit me was sound, but even calling it sound doesn't get it right. It came fast and it came close, and it filled everything. It was a scream. It started high and kept going higher, but it wasn't thin the way a person's scream stretches and breaks. It had body to it, like there was a lung behind it that didn't have to work hard. Long enough for me to understand halfway through that it wasn't going to stop where my brain wanted it to. Sometimes when people yell, you can hear the breath run out and the sound gets ragged. This didn't do that. It held. It vibrated in a way I felt more than I heard, the way a truck's bass can make your chest hum if it idles right next to you. The window sang, not a cartoon shatter. It made a tight buzz like a finger rubbed on a glass rim. The scream came from outside, not across the street, not down the block, right outside. It had that weird deadened quality you get when sound has to push through heavy air, but the volume said window. It felt glued to the window. If you told me later someone had their mouth right against the glass, I would have believed you. There are noises in winter that mess with you. Plows drag, sirens bounce. Wind can make a pitch when it squeezes through old sashes. I know those noises. I knew them even then. This wasn't any of them. This had a throat and a direction and an intent that I still can't name. The best I can say is, it had a rise and fall like a siren without the machine part, like something living was making it happen and could stop if it wanted to. But it didn't stop when I wanted it to. It went on long enough my skin prickled and the hair on the back of my neck stood up stiff. I remember grabbing the edge of the quilt and not being able to make my fingers let go. By the time it dropped off, clean, not trailing off like a sob, it had emptied me out. I lay there waiting for the second one because it felt like the kind of thing that comes in pairs. My ears went greedy and ugly. I waited for footsteps. I had this picture in my child brain of hearing weight move in the crawl space. There's a hatch down under the back porch for the crawl space and an old door that opens under the front steps. You can hear animals under a house sometimes. Squirrels skitter. A cat, if one squeezes in there, will make a desperate little scratching sound at the vents. I was waiting for that, or for the thud of a boot on the porch. My body had turned into a listening device. The smallest pops in the wood felt like crashes. Nothing came. No feet on the porch boards, no scratch, no voice, just a hurt quiet. That's what it felt like. The house held its breath with me until the heat clicked and reminded me to swallow. My heart had gone fast without my permission and I could hear it in my ears, which made it hard to listen for anything else. I laid there until the air in the room felt stale and my tongue went dry. Then I did what kids do when every fear is in one place. I got out of the bed and ran for my parents down the hall, fast enough that I didn't notice the draft until I hit the living room where the hall heater blew. They were awake. My grandmother was awake. Everyone had the look of people who woke up to something they don't want to name and were now saying practical words to make it smaller. There was the kind of confusion that makes adults talk low, so the kids settle. They told me they believed me, and then they offered reasons, even as they stayed under their blankets. A cat in the crawl space having kittens makes a noise, they said. The wind will whistle and turn corners into teeth, and that's all it is. The storm can play tricks. We all nodded because it's easier to nod, and we stayed in our places because no one wanted to open a door. I went back to the front room because that's where my bed was, and because kids do what they're told, even when every part of them says don't. I stood about 3 feet from the window and listened. I remember the curtain edge lifted a little in a draft and brushed my hand with that scratchy fabric. The streetlight painted a faint rectangle on the ceiling where the frost didn't reach. The glass had a tiny line of ice at the bottom where condensation had frozen. I stared at that because it was something real to keep my eyes on. It didn't come again. The longest part of that night was the part after the sound, and it was full of me being braced for a second one that never arrived. My body stayed in that braced place until the first light showed in the kitchen and the heater kicked on for the 5th time after. Sleep happened, but it wasn't good. If I slid dozy for a second, my stomach did that jerk like when you miss a step, and I snapped back up. I kept placing the scream in my head, trying to draw a line out from the window to a point in the yard, and failing, like my brain needed a tree or a hedge to pin it to and couldn't find one. Morning came bright and too loud. Snow has a way of making sunshine feel like a slap when it hits fresh. We bundled without needing to be told and went out because that's what you do after a storm anyway. You go out and look at what the world did while you slept. I went straight to the front of the house and stood under that window. The drift there was high, not to the sill, but high enough that if anyone stood in it, they'd leave holes. There weren't any. The powder was smooth. No cat tracks, no dog, no human boot. The porch steps had a wavy edge from where wind curled, and the bottom step had a crust that cracked when I bumped it with my boot. Under the porch, through the lattice, was just darkness and old leaves. No matted bed, no sign of fur caught on the edges. No messy kitten pile the way a feral cat will leave after a cold night. The only marks came from us when we started to dig the steps out. We spent the morning doing snow things, shovels scraping, metal on concrete, breath white in front of us. I kept sneaking glances at the window. It looked like any window. People waved from their porches. A neighbor tried to start a car that didn't want to start. In daylight, the scream felt ridiculous, like I'd let the wind grab me and shake me, except I hadn't. That's what my chest said every time my mind tried to file it under wind. I knew the sound of an ambulance. We lived close enough to the highway to know sirens. I knew how a neighbor's dog howled at them and made his howl wrap around a siren's pitch. This had been different. It wasn't layered with something mechanical. It didn't chase anything. It was its own thing, pushed straight at a glass pane until the pane shook and my bones wanted to crawl out of themselves. The rest of that day was just a snow day. Tomato soup out of a can and grilled cheese in a pan my grandmother had used for everything since before I was born. Wet boots lined up by the back door, the heater clicking and clicking. Somewhere in there, the radio said more storms were coming, and everyone shrugged the way people do when there's nothing to do but wait. I kept going back to the front bedroom just to stand and look at the window, like it could tell me something. It didn't. The frost melted down to a blurry edge and then refroze when the sun slid off the glass again. The feeling in my gut didn't leave. I didn't tell anyone outside the house because I didn't want to hear jokes about ghosts or banshees or my imagination. I didn't want to hear someone say cougar either. Back then, cougars weren't a thing anyone talked about in our part of Illinois. And even now that you hear of one dragging through every decade or so, what I heard wasn't cat. I've heard the torn-up screech of a feral cat fight behind a shed. I've heard a rabbit scream when a dog gets it. Those sounds feel like they're trying to tear their way out of your skin. This one had control and weight. I couldn't shake that ache. Years later, I was grown and had my own reasons for falling into rabbit holes on the internet. The first time I stumbled onto those recordings, people pass around, long outdoor screams captured late at night and posted with arguments attached. I clicked play thinking I'd roll my eyes. I didn't roll my eyes. My scalp tightened and my throat went cold. And for a few seconds I was standing in that front room again with a boy's hands on a heavy quilt and the taste of winter air on my tongue. It wasn't that the recording matched exactly, it was the shape of it. The way it rose and held and vibrated in a way that felt like the sound went through the device rather than into it. The timbre hit me like someone slung me back across decades. I had to stop the clip because the old feeling didn't care how old I was now. I don't care what you call it. I don't need a label stuck to it to know it happened. People love labels because labels make you feel like you've named a thing means you've tamed it. I was a kid who heard something impossible tear through a perfect winter quiet right outside a window. If it was a person, then a person had a set of lungs and a reason that don't make sense to me. If it was an animal, it wasn't one I've ever heard before or since in that town. No one else in the house heard it the way I did. Maybe the way the front of the house catches wind and sound brought it like a funnel to only my pain. Maybe 100 maybes. It doesn't matter. My ears were there, and they won't let it go. The point where the fear nailed me wasn't danger. It was the contrast. Everything had been thick and soft, snow taking the edge off tires, the heater making even the hallway warm, the house doing that old house settle and breathe. And then that sound tore straight through it like none of it existed. It made all that softness into nothing, like it wasn't there to help me. For a minute, the world got too big for the house I was in. I felt small in a way I didn't know how to be. I wanted my dad to walk into the room, or the dog to jump up on the bed and knock it all back into the right size. None of that happened. It was just me and a window and a scream, and then, suddenly, nothing at all. I can still draw you the front of that house from memory. I can show you where the hedges used to be and how the front steps sagged on the left side because the ground settled weird. I can tell you where the paint peeled and how my grandmother kept a broom by the door to sweep off leaves before they stained the porch. None of those details put footprints under the window. None of them give me a neat ending. It was one long sound in the middle of the night, and it ended as clean as it started. The snow told me nothing in the morning. The crawl space told me nothing. No den, no mess, no drag marks, no tracks. Just a smooth skin on the drift and a cold window that had hummed under something I still can't fit into a box. I've heard every maybe I just wrote out to myself from other people over the years. Wind, cat, teens messing around, siren. I don't argue. I don't have hard proof to show. I have a memory that hasn't dimmed the way you'd expect. Whenever fresh snow stacks deep and the night goes flat and quiet, a part of me waits for it to happen again. When it doesn't, I go to bed grateful and still a little on edge. When it does, if it ever does, I don't know what I'll do. That night, it grew out of the dark, split the world open for a handful of seconds, and sealed it back up like nothing ever touched it. I can't explain it now any more than I could explain it then. It was there, it filled the window, it left, and I'm stuck with it. Right at the point it ends and leaves me listening to a silence that should mean everything is okay and somehow doesn't. Story 5. April of 1978. Lake Kincaid in Jackson County, Illinois. We had been on the water since morning, the kind of day where you leave before the coffee kicks in because you think the crappie will hit first light. The lake had that cold spring bite to it when we put in. Breath hung a little when we exhaled. By mid-afternoon, the sun had softened the edges, but the air still felt raw if you sat still too long. We were in an aluminum boat that had been patched more than once, the kind of boat with bench seats and an old two-stroke on the back that you start by feel more than process. I knew the pull of that rope better than I knew my own handshake. When it went, it had that blue smoke smell that sticks to your clothes. That smell was in my jacket even after I washed it a couple times. We worked the edges that always paid, downed timber along the shallow fingers, a little jig under the floats near the stumps, some slow trolling along a rocky bank that kept teasing us with taps that never set. It wasn't a bad day, just a slow one. Sun on aluminum, the shuffle of a minnow bucket sliding around, the little click of an old reel handle that needs oil. We talked less as the day wore on, not out of bad mood, but because that's what the water does. Takes your words and sinks them. By late afternoon, the wind had dropped and the water smoothed out into those long, gentle rolls that don't do much, just rock you enough to make you lazy. When the shadows stretched off the bluffs and the light started to flatten, my buddy got that itch. He said what he always says when the bite dies: let's open the motor and take a ride. It's an easy call to make when you're sitting on a seat that's made your back feel 50 years older than it is. I wasn't going to argue. We stowed our rods, kicked the minnow bucket into the shade so it wouldn't bake, pulled the anchor, and pointed across toward a rock cove we both liked. The bluff there throws back your voice just enough to make you feel alone, even if there are boats in the next arm over. The trees come right down to the rock. It's shallow out a ways with a sudden drop. The water near the face looks black, even when the rest of the lake runs green. We didn't blast it. You don't blast into Kincaid coves unless you want to chew a prop. We slid in just off idle and then cut it. The motor coughed and died, and the quiet rushed in. It's a particular quiet you get on lakes. The small slap of water on metal, the tiny creak of a rope on a cleat, some bird you never bother to name, ticking in the brush. There was a smell in that cove I always noticed, rock warmed by sun, leaf mold, and that clean clay you get when the bank shows. We were maybe 40 or 50 yards off the bluff face because we don't like to sit under a wall we can't climb if something goes sideways. It looked empty. The hillside above was a tangle of young maples and old oaks with deadfall locked between them. You could see where deer used to run up a notch when the lake was low, but the line was quiet. I remember leaning back against the bench, feeling the give in the rivets behind my shoulder blades, and thinking we'd burn what little gas we had left, and then head in across at a slant to beat the last light. The first odd thing was the way the trees moved. There wasn't a breeze pushing into us, only the smallest ripple on the surface that was more boat-made than wind. But up on that hillside, about halfway between the water and the top, branches started to jitter like a kid shaking a rug out a window. It wasn't one sapling slipping. The whole patch trembled like weight was moving through it. Not fast, not a deer crash. You know the sound a deer makes when it decides it's had enough. It's a brittle, clattery run with hooves hitting rock and leaves scraping. This was low and heavy. It came with a kind of grunt that cut the distance like it didn't care there was a lake between us. Not a pig grunt, not that sharp, wet snort. Deeper, from a chest. We went still in that dumb way fishermen go still, hands floating over the cooler lid, like that would help us hear better. The boat settled into its own wake and went quiet, the bow turning a hair. My stomach did that half-turn that feels like a drop in a truck when you take a dip too fast. I told myself it was a buck rubbing, or two deer hung up in the same tangle and arguing about it. Bucks can make a mess when they get tangled in vines. But the season was wrong for crazy rut behavior, and those grunts didn't space like deer. They sounded placed. We didn't see anything in the brush. Leaves shook, saplings swayed, but there wasn't fur or skin where my eyes wanted it. If you spend enough time in the woods, your brain fills in deer when you see parts of movement. I fought the urge to do that. I held the line of the shaking with my eyes and tried to wait out whatever was going to step into a gap. Water is funny. It carries sound, and it lies about distance. I felt the next thing before I really heard it. The air over the boat changed for a split second, like how you can sense a bird overhead if it's close enough, and then the water in front of the bow exploded. A rock hit so hard and so close that a cold whip of spray came up and slapped me across the face and chest, not the little slap you get when a bluegill flops. This was heavy water, cold and full and just wrong. The boat rocked enough that the minnow bucket slid and banged the bench. I grabbed for the side even though I didn't need to, and my hand came away wet. My first thought was stupid and fast and human. Kids on the bluff, somebody messing with us. Except there were no kids. There was no one to see. No voices, no skitter of shoes on rock, no snap of dead branches that always give people away no matter how careful they think they are. And the angle was wrong. That rock didn't drop from straight above. It arced from that shaking patch of trees. It came from the hillside. It came with intent. You feel a thrown thing in your bones. It isn't like a slide of rock from a raccoon or an erosion fall. It has a spin and a speed and a picked line. This was a chosen place to land. It hit just off the bow like a warning thrown to land where your eyes will go. I should say what the rock looked like, but the truth is, I didn't clock the rock itself until the water calmed, and I saw a dark shape drop below the surface and disappear into that sudden deep water next to the wall. It wasn't a little hand-sized toss. It was a chunk, I would say cinder block chunk, or a slim bowling ball, that kind of weight. It left a column. It sounded like a lake thrown at us, more than a rock thrown into a lake. Everything went small, my hands, my field of view, my breath. My eyes did that stupid scan from left to right to left, like I would catch a face peeking, and that would make sense of it. I wanted it to be a person so badly in that second, because people you can yell at or get away from, or at the very least understand. Before my brain could pick a plan, another rock came. That one landed closer. If the first one felt like a warning, the second felt like a decision made about where we were in relation to it. You don't know how to say that out loud without sounding crazy, but that is what it felt like. The second rock chose us. It hit off the starboard side near enough that the slap came in on my legs and soaked my jeans from the knees down, and I could taste lake on my tongue. It wasn't the same size. It felt heavier, which makes no sense because you can't feel the weight of a thrown rock from the water it makes. But somehow you do. The boat rocked hard enough that the motor skeg tapped, and the anchor rope, which I had looped around the cleat without tying yet because I'm lazy, creaked like it wanted to slide. I grabbed it with both hands out of raw reflex and burned 2 fingers because the rope was wet and taut. In that 2 heartbeats between first splash and second, I went through every cause I could slap onto it. No wind to drop rock, no critter who throws, no person you can't hear or see that can heave a rock that big that far at that angle. That hillside is not an easy climb. I've been up that kind of slope, and I know how the ground gives, and how roots pull, and how your breath sounds in your own head. If 2 guys had been up there pulling a prank, we'd have heard something, even a laugh they couldn't swallow, a branch snap that didn't fit the other noises. There was only that slow grit and grunt before, and then the throws. Like whoever or whatever did it, walked up to the edge of its cover, measured us in the water, and put 2 big pieces of the hill into the lake where it wanted them to be. People always ask why we didn't gun it after the first one. Because you second-guess everything that is outside normal, and you want it to have not happened the way you think it did. You try to make it a misread, so you don't have to react like you're in danger. The second rock removed that luxury. It snapped me into doing without thinking. I dropped into the seat, one hand already on the throttle, the other hand pulling that starter like my life depended on the first pop. The engine coughed and didn't catch. My stomach went hollow. The third pull caught. That 2-stroke scream was the best sound I've ever heard on water. I didn't wait to be elegant. I swung the bow hard. The prop dug and cavitated a second, grabbed and shoved, and we started moving away from that wall. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder because another rock from that angle while we were turned would have put it right into our middle. I saw the hillside shake one more time. A sapling whipped back like a hand had let go. No rock followed, no third slap. We slid out into the open, where the water gets more honest, and I didn't bring the motor down until the bluff was a line, and the cove was just another cut on the shoreline. Only then did the noise in my head let up enough for me to realize how badly my hands were shaking. My shirt stuck cold to my skin from the spray. The little hairs on my arms were up like I was freezing, even though my face felt hot. Adrenaline is a dumb chemical. It makes you feel both things at once. We didn't talk. Not really. Words would have put us back there. I kept seeing the water lift like a fist and fall, and seeing it from the wrong angle. The aimed angle, the "you are here" angle. I turned the boat toward the ramp and let the motor run fatter than I should have because quiet felt like permission. I kept flicking my eyes to the timberline like the trees were going to stand up and throw the whole shore at us. I didn't want to sit still long enough for anything to decide to finish what it had started. At the ramp, the normal world does its thing whether you're ready or not. Backing in takes its time. Straps fight, ropes tangle. People in another truck were fooling with a cooler and a radio and laughing. It should have reset me. It didn't. My legs felt like I'd done a dead sprint even though I'd been sitting for hours. The inside of my cheek tasted like copper where I'd bit down without knowing it. I had droplets dried on my glasses. I didn't remember not wiping. My buddy looked too hard at edges of things, fenders, cleats, the corner of a glove box, anywhere that wasn't the water. We didn't go to the ranger. Maybe that was dumb. It felt dumber to try to explain what we didn't see. Hi. Someone threw rocks at us bigger than any human can throw, from a hillside with no one on it. That's not a sentence that makes a person gets up from their chair. And there was a fear under my fear that I don't love to admit, that if we told it, it would feel more real, less containable, and I would have to start dividing the world into places where the hill will throw the hill at you and places where it won't. Years later, I watched some little local segment about Murfreesboro and the so-called monster sightings. People with shaky voices showing creek banks and pointing at places where something had stomped everything flat. They brought up Momo like a joke and then not like a joke, and all I could think about was that cove on Kincaid, that grunt from a chest I couldn't see, and rocks that came out like answers to a question we hadn't asked. It slotted into a box I didn't want in my head. I'm not telling you that's what it was. I'm telling you that for the first time, it gave me a frame that wasn't "we made it up" or "a kid pushed a boulder off a cliff and then melted." So it gave me a line that connected "I have heard of things throwing rocks" to "I have felt the slap those rocks make when they pick me." The scary part wasn't getting wet. It wasn't almost losing balance or worrying about the boat. The scary part was the second rock, because that's when it felt deliberate. The first one, you doubt yourself. The second one, you know something out there measured you and decided you were target enough. That is a feeling I don't recommend anyone put in their chest. When I hear splash on a calm day now, my body tenses before my brain asks what it was. I still fish. I still go to Kincaid, but I don't tuck into that cove anymore. I cut a wide path around that bluff and pretend it's because the bite is better elsewhere. I know why I do it. If you put me on a map, I could point to that patch and feel my fingers get colder. Maybe it was a person. Maybe there was a path up we didn't know, and some very strong idiot timed 2 perfect throws and hid like a ghost. Maybe, or maybe it was exactly what it sounded like, something big and quiet using a language we didn't understand to say leave. We left. We didn't touch the cooler until we were off the lake. We didn't crack a beer or do a victory laugh. We put the boat on the trailer, tied the lights, and got out. The drive home was more engine and less talk than any drive we'd made after a long day on the water. The sun finished its drop while we were winding through the trees, and the world turned into that flat grey that makes shape a guess. The road felt narrower. The radio stayed off. If we'd heard a rock on gravel at that point, I think both our hearts would have blown apart. I know some folks want a sighting or a roar or something that pins the tail to the board. I don't have that. I have 2 heavy splashes placed where they shouldn't have been, and the way the hillside moved without a deer. That's it. That was enough. It took a normal late afternoon, a slow one with nothing to write home about, and split it into before and after. Before was the smell of 2-stroke, the taste of warm pop, the feel of a worn reel handle. After was water hitting like a fist, and the part of my brain that won't stop listening for a third that never came. It ended fast, like someone snapped off a switch. 2 throws, our wake, open water, and it left me with something I can't explain to this day. Story 6. April of 1978, Jackson County, Illinois. It was the first truly warm spell after a stubborn, muddy March, and I had that itch you get when the lilacs think about popping and the red buds put pink along the field lines. That's my cue to check the old bottoms for morels. I took my little boy with me because it was a Saturday and he loved any excuse to be outside. He had a small pail, and I had a paper sack and a short knife that had been sharpened down to a sliver from years of garden work. We weren't going far. The place is a little strip of timber that follows a shallow creek behind a pasture, with a low ridge on one side, sycamores and old elm stumps on the other. It's not tidy woods, it's windfall, grapevine, briars that grab your socks, and a lot of last year's leaves matted down where the water lays after a rain. We parked at the pull-off, where a 2-track slides down through a gap in the fence. I remember the truck ticked as the engine cooled, and somewhere a chain on a gate clinked when the wind hit it. The sky was clean, no haze, the kind of blue that makes you feel lazy. It wasn't hot yet, but you could feel the day leaning that way. I'd guess it was around 2 p.m. maybe a hair earlier. The grass had gone tender and bright in the low spots, and the May apples had punched up their umbrellas. That's Morel time for us, May apples and dying elms. We crossed at the narrow part of the creek where somebody before us had thrown a few flat rocks into a line. The water was just deep enough over the deeper bit to be a darker brown. It carried that cold that bites your ankle bones. It was clear enough to see the little bits of mica in the sand. The banks are low there, 2 feet, 3 at the most, with exposed roots like knuckles. Up beyond the banks, the ground opens a little. You can see 30 yards in spots, then it closes again where the grapevine drapes down and makes a curtain. Birds were doing daytime bird things, cardinals on the edges flinging their voices, a woodpecker tapping easy on a dead limb, crows arguing with nobody in particular. The wind wasn't doing much, just enough to move the top leaves of the sycamores and make the little creek water flicker. We did the usual slow scan you do when you're looking for morels. You have to let your eyes go soft and catch a shape that doesn't belong. Old elm bases, ash with a bit of bark peeling, the sunny edges where the ground warms. He stuck close at my hip with his pail and pointed at every brown thing that stuck up, and I told him which to kick and which to leave. We found a handful, not a haul, 2 nice blonde ones and a couple smaller greys hiding under leaf curl next to where a big elm had rotted down years ago. I sliced them off at the base and brushed the dirt off and told him not to crush them in the pail, even though I knew he would. It felt like a clean afternoon on a quiet piece of land you think you know. I was crouched, squatting in that way you do when your knees are younger than your back, checking around a tangle of last year's grapevine. The leaves there hold moisture and sometimes mushrooms like that. I remember looking at a stick that looked like a snake and deciding I was going to step over it anyway. The air smelled like wet leaves with the sun on them. The kid was maybe 3 steps away with his pail, digging with his toe at an anthill. The first thing that twisted my attention wasn't a sound. It was a motion in the corner of my eye that didn't match the lazy day. If you've spent any time in the woods, you know vines will twitch without warning when they let go from somewhere high. This wasn't a vine twitch, but that's where my head went first. Behind me, across the creek, something moved in that careful way where it shows you part by mistake and then tries to take it back. I turned my head about halfway and stopped because what I saw didn't match anything my brain had on file. I saw a knee. That sounds dumb until you've seen it. A knee and the outer line of a thigh coming out from behind the trunk of a big tree. The tree was an oak. An old one, not massive, but thick enough I couldn't get my arms around it. It was on the far bank, slightly upstream, maybe 27 to 30 meters away if I had to guess stepping it off, because later I did step it off. The knee was bent in a way that said it was about to step out, not like someone shifting their weight. The hair on it lay flat along the thigh, long and black enough to shine a little in the sun when it moved. Not shaggy like a dog after rain, heavy and clean, laying the same direction from top to knee. Then a shoulder came around, the deltoid line if we're going to get technical, and an arm. The mass of that shoulder didn't make sense with the quiet of the leaves. It came around the trunk slow, like someone testing a room with a toe before they commit. I was already turned by then, not crouched anymore, pushing up to stand, because every part of me went hard in that stupid automatic way where you want to be taller when you don't know what's looking at you. The face followed the shoulder. Face is the wrong word if you're thinking of seeing skin. There wasn't any. Hair covered from the top of the head down over the brow and out across cheek and jaw. Dark black hair, same as the knee, same as the arm, and it fell in a way that made a curtain, but not enough to hide the eyes. The eyes were set deep enough that at first all I saw was the dark and the way the hair parted around it. Then it blinked. The blink is what punched me. You don't think about blinking as an event until the white shows. The whites showed and vanished. It was fast like any blink. But my brain had more assignments in that half instant than it could handle. It told me that there were eyes and lids and moisture and muscle doing a thing that we do. It took away every easy out I had lined up. A stump doesn't blink. A pile of brush doesn't blink. A man in a mask can't put eyes where the hair grows like that. It took that excuse away from me in a finger snap. That's when my boy looked up at me, and I felt my whole chest go into that animal place every parent has. I put a hand on his shoulder without looking down. I didn't need to look down. I needed my eyes on the tree and the thing behind it. Everything went tight and far away at once. The creak noise got louder for a second, like the water was doing its best to fill the gap my ears made when they stopped working right. We didn't move for a beat. I was on my feet now. My hand tightened on the little knife automatically, like it would do something, and I knew even while I was doing it that it was a useless thing to hold. The thing across the creek didn't step out. It didn't huff. It didn't show teeth. It pulled back behind the trunk in a motion as deliberate as the step it had started. No jerk, no panic, just a choice to be hidden again. I saw the line of the shoulder slide back. The hair, the same heavy fall, went with it. Then it was a tree again, and my head tried to make that tree into the only thing that had been there all along. I don't remember deciding to leave. I remember my hand finding the back of my kid's shirt and walking him the way you walk a child across a parking lot, with short, sure steps. His pail knocked my knee twice and then hit the ground because he dropped it. It didn't register. My paper sack with our handful of mushrooms swung against my leg, and then I realized later I didn't have it anymore either. The distance back to the 2-track is not far. You come out of the trees, into the open in 50 steps, 60 maybe. It felt like a mile. Every stick underfoot was a gun going off in my head. I kept expecting that thing to step into the open on the far bank and cut down the creek and pace us. It didn't. There was no crashing, no chase, no big theatrics. If anything, the woods got too quiet, like it was listening the same way I was. I strapped my boy into the truck like I was doing it for the first time, fingers stupid, tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I could taste that dusty sweetness you get on a warm day when you've been in the leaves. He watched me with a face that made me feel worse because he wasn't scared the way I was. He looked curious and tired. It made me feel like the terror in me was the only unreal thing. I sat behind the wheel with my hands on it and my head turned toward the trees and fought myself. I don't carry a sidearm to hunt mushrooms. There was a shotgun behind the seat. It's there for coyotes that won't take a hint and the odd mean dog. I didn't want to touch it. I also didn't want to drive away and lie to myself forever about what I'd seen. I told myself I would do the dumb compromise, back up the truck to where I could see the first line of trees, leave my boy buckled with the doors locked, and step out 20 yards with the gun not to shoot, but to look with my eyes lined up behind something that made me feel less like prey. I'm not proud of leaving him in the cab for those minutes. I did it anyway because I couldn't bring him back into the trees and I couldn't stand doing nothing. I cracked the truck door. The heat that had built up in the cab hit me in the face. The light outside felt harsher than it had 15 minutes before. I slid the shotgun out and checked it because that's what you do even when your brain is skipping. It was loaded like always. I didn't shoulder it. I held it the way you hold something you'd rather not use. I walked to the top of the little slope where you can see the creek cut. The world looked the same. It looked insultingly normal. The vine curtain draped the same. The breeze moved the same top leaves. The water made the same small sounds against the little rocks we'd stepped across. I scanned the far bank first, where that tree stands. You notice small things when you have had your life punched. A little clump of moss on the north side of the trunk, a piece of bark split clean where something big had brushed it. The bark had a fresh peel to it, lighter where the dark outer layer had been slicked off. It could have been a deer. It could have been me inventing it. I stood there anyway and fixed it in my eyes so I could check it later if I ever had the guts to come back. Then I looked down at the nearer bank where the creek bed goes sandy. That's where I found the prints, not on our side. Across, downstream a little on a bar the water leaves when it goes down after a rain. They weren't picture book prints. You don't get that kind of clarity and that kind of dirt when it hasn't rained in a bit. But there were two wide depressions, canted a little the way a stride pushes, deeper at the front, shallow at the back, like weight came down and rocked forward. If I put my boot inside the outline, the print spread past on both sides enough that it made me pull my foot back like I'd stepped where I didn't belong. They were deeper than anything I left when I crossed earlier. I'm not a small man. My boot sinks a fair bit. These went down where the sand firms under. I didn't see toes. I saw the shape of something broad that had put weight there recently enough that the edges were still clean against the little bits the wind moves. I didn't stay long. That's the truth. I looked too long for something my brain would accept. Hair on a stick, a smear of anything, a clean heel. And when I didn't get it, my nerves started leaking out my heels. The shotgun didn't change the fact that I was standing in a place I had walked 100 times and had never felt this way in. I backed out the way I came, keeping my eyes on that spot by the tree, like it was a road you don't want to take your eyes off. Back at the truck, I put the gun where it goes and sat down and finally found my breath. It hit me then. What had gotten me the worst? It wasn't the height, it wasn't the mass, it wasn't even the idea that something like that was in daylight in Jackson County. It was that blink. It was eye to eye with something that should not be there at 2 in the afternoon on a clear spring day just beyond a cattle pasture. The blink took away every excuse. It wasn't shadow. It wasn't a vine in a wrong light. It wasn't a person in a ghillie suit I could lecture and be mad at. It was a living thing that looked at me and then chose to not be looked at. We drove out slow. Gravel under the tires sounded too loud. My boy asked for his pail, and I told him we'd get another one and didn't explain why the mushrooms didn't matter anymore. I chewed the inside of my cheek and watched the tree line in the mirror, because that's what fear makes you do. Even when you know, if something wanted you, it would not warn you first. I didn't feel like I had been hunted. That's important to say, because the story gets thrown around as if it always ends with a chase. It didn't feel like that. It felt like two creatures walked into each other's afternoon from the wrong sides. It felt like I interrupted something, and it decided the smallest move it could make was to step back and let me go. That should have made it easier to sit with. Somehow it made it worse, because it meant intent and choice, and that means a smarter world than the one I had planned on. I don't know what I saw. I can tell you what it wasn't better than I can tell you what it was. It wasn't a bear. We don't have bears like that there, and I've seen bears since, and the shape is wrong, and the face hair weaves different. It wasn't a person, unless someone in this county grew a coat that moves, like a body grew it, and figured out how to plant feet that big, that deep, without leaving heel and toe like a boot. It didn't smell like anything. People always say there's a stink. If there was one, it didn't carry across that creek to me. All I had was sun on leaves, and the creek, and the slap of my own blood in my ears. Maybe the wind was wrong for smell. Maybe this one didn't smell. Maybe I didn't notice because my head had one job and it wasn't logging odors. I didn't go around telling everybody. Who would I tell? Back then, there wasn't a person at the feed store who'd do anything but laugh or go quiet on you in a way that's worse than laughter. I talked to nobody for a long time. It didn't become a whole other thing. It stayed exactly what it was. A spring afternoon that broke in half. Before the blink and after. That's the only way I can end this. Because that's the end it gave me. It didn't roar. It didn't throw anything. It didn't run. It slid back behind a tree and left me to walk my boy to a truck and stare at two wide, deep prints on the other side of a creek and then drive away. I can still see that eyelid flash white and gone and feel the way the world shrank around it, like all the air in a big room got pulled through a straw. And then it stopped. No follow-up, no second act, just sun on the hood, gravel popping, and a family woods that hasn't looked the same to me since. I can't make more of it than that, and I can't make less, and it sits there in my head at the point where it cuts off mid-motion, like I'm still standing with my hand on my kid's shoulder, waiting for something else to happen that never did. Story 7. Spring of 1978 in Macoupin County, Illinois. If you grew up there, you know the little roads, narrow, no shoulder, hedgerows right up against the ditches, a skinny bridge here and there over a creek nobody ever named properly. I was late teens, had a car that smelled like vinyl and dust and the last cologne sample I'd spilled, and a girlfriend who liked to get out where the lights didn't reach. There was a spot we used by a short bridge over a creek, maybe 20 feet past the end of the guardrail, where you could pull off half onto the grass and half on gravel. On one side of the road was a stand of timber that had grown thick and messy, the kind that swallows sound. On the other side was a cornfield, spring stubble still showing, with the first faint green just then starting to think about coming up. It was one of those quiet, cool nights where everything felt damp before the dew even settled. We weren't doing anything wild. Radio low, engine off, windows cracked because the car fogs up fast in a low spot like that. The sky had a thin cloud cover that made the night feel close. You could still pick out a few stars through it. The creek made that slow, lazy sound it does when it slides over rock and into deeper water. Frogs were going, and you could hear crickets and a few of the birds that refused to shut up. Every so often a far-off dog would bark itself out and stop. It felt safe and small, that kind of pocket where the rest of the county disappears. What I remember first going wrong wasn't a sound, it was a smell. It tripped me like a wire. It came in slow under the sweet damp of the creek and the clean smell of spring dirt, and then it was all I could taste. Sour, sharp, like something between ammonia and garbage that's been sitting wet. Not skunk. Skunk has that burnt rubber punch. This sat high in the nose and made my eyes want to water. I thought car first, maybe a hot battery or something spilled, but it wasn't coming from the dash. It felt like it was pushing in through the open cracks of the windows. It wasn't there, then it was, and the moment it hit, the frogs cut off like someone had found a switch. The whole outside went flat. No insects, no frogs, no nothing. I could hear the creek louder because it was the only thing left. The hair on my arms stood up, and I felt cold even though we had the heater on earlier. There's a hush the woods make when a storm's blowing in, that pressure change that makes your ears feel full. It was like that, only magnified and shoved right up against the car. I had that sudden feeling that we weren't alone, and that whatever else was out there wasn't interested in staying a background noise anymore. Footsteps came slow. I know what deer sound like on leaves. They skitter and stop, and they stomp when they want you to go. This wasn't skitter. It wasn't 4 feet. It was weight, one step at a time, placed. You could feel the leaves compress more than hear them, then the whisper of brush snapping back after, not big pushes, just deliberate. It was coming from the timber side, down near the ditch where the hedge meets the end of the bridge. The way the car sat, it felt like whatever it was hovered just over the front right fender, just past where the headlight would have cut if it had been on. I didn't say anything. I went still. I could feel my girlfriend go still in the same way, like we'd practiced this and didn't know we had. The smell pushed harder for a second, like the source got closer, and then I heard it, the first sound besides the steps, a grunt. Not an angry pig. Pigs have a wet noise to them, a chatter even when they grunt. This was a deep chest sound, short, like someone trying to clear something heavy out of their throat only once. It came from low, right at the level where a tall man's chest would be if he stood on the shoulder and leaned toward the car. Except this wasn't a tall man. In the dark, I couldn't see a shape, but the way the sound hit the car told me where it was like sonar. It felt like a palm pressed close to the skin of the door without touching it. Another step, another breath that wasn't ours. My heart got loud in my ears, and my fingers went dumb. I had this crazy urge to crank the window up even though it was only down an inch. I didn't move. I felt the car settle on its springs as we both held our breath and leaned back. The metal of the door picked up a vibration that wasn't engine or wind. It was like the car was a drum, and something outside was choosing whether to tap it. I remember thinking I could feel that decision being made, and it made me want to crawl out of my own skin. Then it let go of the low noises and did the thing that still breaks my chest open when I think about it. It screamed. It built fast, like it took a deep breath I didn't hear, and then put everything into it. High, not human high, and not a cat scream you hear over at a barn sometimes. People talk about bobcats. I've heard bobcats. A bobcat screams and it's sharp and ugly and short. This was long and it stayed on the same line like a siren without the machine beneath it. It had a body to it that made it feel like it could lift the car. The sound went through me. The windows hummed. The steering wheel vibrated under my hands. My teeth felt it. It was like standing too close to an engine on a ferry when the captain revs, only higher and somehow more alive. It went on long enough that my muscles tried to lock. The air inside the car turned thin. I don't know how far into that scream I lost the ability to think. 1 second I was a statue. The next second, everything in me pitched forward into an instinct to get away that didn't care about dignity or logic. I went over the console from the back and landed half on the emergency brake and half on the driver's seat. I didn't look out the passenger window. I didn't want to see what went with that sound. My girlfriend slid sideways and down, and I don't know how we didn't kick each other. I got the keys to turn with fingers that didn't want to be fingers. The car caught with that old starter grind, and I jammed it into drive, and that scream was still going when I hit the gas, and the rear tires bit at the gravel, hopped, and then caught. We left things behind. The spots where we'd been were still warm. I saw a flash of my shirt on the back seat in the mirror, and then the bridge rail slid past, and the front tires hit the lip of pavement beyond, and we shot up the little hill toward higher ground. I kept pushing the pedal like the motor needed convincing. The whole way up, my body braced for hands on the trunk or a slam into the side of the car. Nothing hit us. The scream didn't chase. It stopped as clean as it had started. 1 second, it filled the world. The next second, the world was just engine and gravel and me breathing too hard. At the top of the hill, the road widens out by a field entrance. I threw it in park without remembering doing it. We didn't talk, because what would you say? The car ticked as the exhaust cooled faster than it liked. The night felt empty in a way I've never felt it since. I rolled the window down the rest of the way in a stupid test of whether my ears were still working. The air that came in had lost that sharp sourness, but I still caught it here and there, like it had smeared itself on the inside of my nose. The frogs back down by the creek started up in a ragged wave, one, then another, then all at once, like a decision had been announced. We sat there shaking. I could feel the seat sticking to the backs of my legs. My chest felt like I'd run sprints. I kept checking the mirror, even though the hill cut off any view of the bridge. You know when you want to frame something reasonable to set against the thing that just happened? That kicked in. Owl, my brain offered. Owls will call so loud it shocks you. I've had owls make me jump. But the shape of this wasn't an owl. Owls hoot and screech in bursts. This held and held. I've heard people say a fox can sound like a woman screaming. I've heard that too, and it's true. It grabs you. It's not this. A fox's scream is thin and it cuts quick, and it skitters along the top of your skin. This went through the car like a held note, and it lived in my chest. Bear? That was the other thing that tried to show up and give me a bridge to cross back to normal. We don't have bears there, and even if one had wandered in, they don't scream like that, and they don't smell like that. I don't have a perfect memory for odor, but I can tell you that smell was wrong for anything I have been around at night. I thought about big cats because someone always does. A cougar can make a bad sound. I will give that to anyone who wants it, but the throaty grunt before, the steps, the way the sound hit the car like it did, none of that lined up with a cat stalking the edge of a road. What scared me more than the sound after the fact was the closeness. It was right there. I couldn't make myself look out the passenger window while it happened because I knew if I did, the face of the thing making that sound would be level with the glass. If I had flipped the headlights on, I think they would have lit up hair and eyes a few feet from the bumper. We had parked with the nose of the car just past the bridge rail, the right front quarter toward the ditch and the timber. The steps set right there. The grunt came from there. The scream came in like a hand pressed against the skin of the car. We were sitting, and something stood within a couple steps watching and chose to announce itself instead of dragging us out of the car or pounding on the door. That decision has stuck with me longer than the sound did in my ears. I slid the car back into gear, with my hands still not doing what I wanted. We eased forward and took the long loop back to pavement. I wanted lights. I wanted distance. When we finally hit the highway and the yellow lines showed up, neither of us said anything useful. My brain had that shocky hum in it, like after a wreck, where you keep replaying the few seconds before the impact. I told myself over and over we were fine, but my body didn't buy it. My heart kept finding a sprint and then losing it. Every shadow off the side of the road looked like a shape that would lean in. In the days after, no, I'm not going to stretch this out into days because what happened in that hour. But later that week, when I went to the car wash, I kept wanting to look for prints and not wanting to look. There weren't marks, no handprints, no dents. It never touched us. That's the part that sits wrong in my head, the restraint. Something stood close enough to fog the car with its breath and decided all it needed to do was tell us that. We were out of there because it said we should be. We did not choose to leave. That night convinced me of that. We reacted. It decided. It's a small difference in words and a big one in your gut. I stayed away from that back road after. For years, if someone suggested we take the fun way, I found a reason to say no. I eventually went back to the woods at night, but it took a long time, and I never parked by that bridge again. If I have to cross it, I keep rolling. I don't let the engine die. It's ridiculous, a grown person making a deal with a patch of timber and a little creek. But that's what fear does. It makes you polite to places. I know how this sounds typed out. People drag in every possible normal explanation because they need a lid. I need one too, and I haven't found it. I have smelled dead livestock in summer. I have been too close to skunk. I've heard owls go off so loud they make your scalp tighten. I have made a coyote yip howl back at a siren just to hear the sound bounce. I've had a bobcat rip the night apart up by an old barn. This didn't sit in any of those seats. If you're waiting for a picture or a footprint or some neat thing to pin the whole night down, I don't have it. What I have is the metal of an old car humming under my hands and a held scream that made the world go thin, a sour smell that ate every other smell, and the clean slam of silence after, like it hadn't happened at all. That contrast is what still hits me. One second we were two kids in a quiet pocket of countryside. The next second, something stood a few steps away and poured its voice straight through steel and glass and bone, as if none of that mattered. And then it cut off, just gone. No slowly fading away down the creek, no ramp up or ramp down, off. Sometimes I'll be driving at night, windows cracked, same county, same kind of ditch, and the frogs will get loud enough that I notice them, and then, for a heartbeat, they'll stutter. My chest gets tight in that one beat. That's all it takes to put me back there. That night didn't end with a chase or a confrontation. It ended with us running because our bodies needed to, and the place we left behind going instantly normal, like nothing had taken claim of it for 30 seconds. The scream still shows up in my teeth when I think about it, and I can't explain any of it. It happened, it stopped, and I'm right back at the edge of that bridge, motor off, breath held, waiting for a sound I never want to hear again. Story 8. October 21st of 1978, Madison County, Illinois, just outside Edwardsville. I was home on leave from the Air Force and doing what I always did when I had a free morning back then, driving my father's car along the little back roads I grew up on, letting the quiet settle me. It was one of those damp, grey mornings where the fog isn't a wall but a low ceiling. Everything felt wet to the touch. You could see beads of moisture sitting on the fence wire, and breath hung a second in front of you when you exhaled. The kind of morning that makes sounds feel muffled and close. There's a narrow lane behind an old church on the edge of town. If you take it, it runs you past a small cemetery, then opens into a long hayfield with a few rusty feed rings scattered out there. The kind with a wide metal circle and slats where you slide a round bale. No houses back there, just fields and a thin finger of timber at the far edge. It's the sort of spot you drive when you don't want to see anybody, and you want to remember what it was like when you were a kid. And the only thing that mattered was if the creek was high enough to splash your boots. I eased along that lane with the windows cracked because the car smelled like old vinyl and hot dust, and I wanted the morning air instead. My dad kept that car too tidy for me, so I noticed every small change, like the grit from my boots on the rubber mat and the way the fog wanted to creep in through the cracked window and leave a rim of damp on the chrome. The church behind me was a low shape in the mirror. Up ahead, the field sat quiet, grass slicked down with dew, the feed rings dark with wet. Down in the ruts of the two-track, water had collected overnight. Not deep puddles, just shallow sheets reflecting that flat grey sky. I saw it because it moved. A dark shape at one of those puddles crouched low, shoulders hunched, splashing water with its hands. I didn't process it the way my brain would handle a person kneeling. The posture was wrong for that. It read as animal first. My first thought, stupid and fast, a bear, which is ridiculous for there and then, but you don't get to pick that first word. Bear came because of the roundness through the shoulders and the heavy way it held itself over the water. I slowed without meaning to. The tires sang a little on the wet dirt. The shape didn't react. It kept its head down and its hands, yes, hands, that's what they were, scooped and slapped the shallow water like it was washing or playing. I inched closer with the left wheels in the grass and the right wheels in the rut, and the closer I got, the more my brain rejected bear. Bears don't have elbows like that or forearms that long. Bears don't put the flat of their hand into water and cup it back toward themselves. I was maybe 10 yards out when I realized I was not looking at anything I had a word for. The fog didn't help or hurt. It just made the edges of everything soft. What hit me hard was size. Even crouched, it took up too much space. The hair, or fur, if that makes you more comfortable, looked black in that light, maybe with a sheen that would go brown if the sun had been out. It lay flat from the head down, over the shoulders and along the arms, wet at the tips where the water had been thrown. The shoulders were the sort that swallow a neck. The forearms were long and thick, the muscles showing under the hair when it moved. When the hands came down into the water, the fingers spread wide. You could see the water walk up between them and fall back. I felt that prickle on the back of my neck that I don't think I'd felt since I was a kid. It's the feeling that says your body has noticed something before you have. I steered off the lane into the field because my dumb brain wanted me beside it instead of behind it. The grass took the tires fine. I pulled up so that the car's door was between me and it. That wasn't a big plan, that was instinct. I killed the engine without thinking, popped the trunk, and got out with my left knee already bent, so I stayed low behind the door. The door's edge was cold and wet. Moisture beaded and rolled down onto my hand. In the trunk was my father's goose gun, long, heavy 3-inch Magnum loads in the box next to it, because that's what he hunted with when the geese came through late. The trunk had that smell of carpet and trunk glue and oil. I grabbed the gun because that's what years of training says you do when you've seen something you can't put a name to, and because I already felt stupid for having driven closer. I racked one in. The sound of the action in that quiet felt loud enough to carry to town. I didn't aim at it, not at first. I leaned out from the door to get eyes on it again, and that's when it stood. If you've ever been near a big guy who stands up in a small room, you know the way it steals the space. This stole the space of that whole slice of field. It unfolded, not fast, not slow, no jerk, just a controlled rise like muscle with no wasted motion, up past where my head sits, up past where my hand could reach if I stretched. 8 feet 9, I don't know, tall to the point that the feed rings look smaller with it in the same picture, big across too. The width almost bothered me more than the height. The trapezius, if you know the muscle, was too full. It made the head look sunk in at the base. The arms hung long enough that the hands were near mid-thigh. The legs weren't stilt legs on a skinny person. They were the kinds of legs you see on linemen, thick but not sloppy, made to hold. I could not see the face clearly. The fog and the angle and the way the hair fell fronted me. But I could see deep-set eyes under a heavy brow, not glowing or doing anything movie-worthy, just shadowed enough to make the face hard to read. The nose didn't stick long like a dog. It sat flat and wide, more like a bad break in a human's nose would flatten it. The mouth was a line I couldn't place. It turned the head, and I knew even without seeing clearly that it was looking at me. You can feel that. Every hair on my arm stood up at once. I brought the gun up, not to center mass, left of it into the wet dirt. The mag load thumped heavy and the sound didn't ring right because of the fog. It was like the noise got swallowed by the air. The shot threw mud and water up. The thing didn't flinch. It stood there. No duck, no rise of hands. It didn't even set its feet like it was prepping to come. It just absorbed the fact of the shot, the way a farmer absorbs a thunderclap in a distant storm. The only motion I registered was a slow adjustment at the shoulders, like easing a stiffness. People like to ask, why not shoot it? I don't have an answer you'll like, because I didn't want to be the guy who put shot into something I couldn't name. Because even in that moment, I didn't want to kill something that hadn't done anything but exist. Because my training says you don't put rounds into unknowns unless you have to. Because there was a cold, clean certainty building in my gut that said hitting it would be a worse decision than not hitting it. I fired again to the right of it, a hair farther out, another mag load into wet ground. Mud and puddle water jumped. The smell of powder laid itself over the wet hay and clay. The recoil ran up my shoulder and into my jaw. My ears rang in a way the fog still couldn't completely dampen. That's the moment the fear really hit me. Not the standing up, not the size, not even the act of pulling the trigger. The moment right after the second shot, when its body language didn't change at all, and my brain finally put a sentence to what my body already knew. Even if you put this into its chest, you are not going to like what happens next. It wasn't an idea, it was a certainty. I felt it like a hand on the back of my neck. I remember thinking, clear as a bell, you can't hurt this in a way that ends well. It made a motion then that my brain keeps calling a shrug because that's what it looked like. A roll through the shoulders and a lift and drop, like someone easing out a kink. It read as contempt in the moment, but in the years since, I have wondered if it was just a loosening before a move. It turned slightly, not a big pivot, and then it was going. Not a sprint. Not the flail you expect from something big. 3 or 4 bounds, each one too long for my eyes to process, as in 15 feet or better, and it crossed that slice of field like the space wasn't real. The step length is what I remember most after that shrug. You could see the grass lay over in long ellipses where each foot came down. It didn't churn, it didn't rip. It placed and went, like it already knew where each foot needed to land to stay quiet. Past a feed ring, a hand brushed it without grabbing and the ring quivered for a second. Then it reached that finger of woods at the far side and was gone. Not crashed into. It slipped into. 1 second it was a mass against grey. The next second, it was trees and fog again, and the only proof it ever had been there was the ripple of water in the puddle from when it stood and the echo of my own shots in my head. I stood there with the gun half raised and the car door pushing into my hip and the fog on my face feeling cold in a way it hadn't felt in 20 minutes. The smell of wet hay and powder made a weird mix that turned my stomach. My hands shook the way they do after adrenaline has had its run and suddenly finds it has nowhere to go. I slid the gun back down without remembering deciding to. The trunk was still open. The lid had collected 1,000 tiny beads of moisture, and when I shut it, they ran like a sheet. The world went ordinary again fast. Birds started their small sound somewhere behind me. A truck a mile away hit a bit of gravel, and I heard it. I hadn't heard anything but my own blood for a stretch there. I didn't go check prints. I didn't step 1 foot farther into that field. I knew myself well enough to know I was at the edge of something I didn't want into. I got back in the car and made my hands do what hands do. Key, pedal, wheel. The engine caught, and it felt good to have an engine in front of me that I understood. I pulled out of there slow and then faster than slow. The church glided past on my right. I watched the mirror like it meant anything and then told myself to stop watching the mirror because it didn't. I drove straight to the sheriff's office in Edwardsville because that felt like something an adult does, and because if I didn't say it out loud to someone, right, then I'd talk myself out of the whole morning. I walked in with my shirt damp and probably a look that wasn't doing me any favors and said what I could without sounding insane. I didn't dress it up. I didn't use a label. I said I'd seen something huge and upright and not a bear and not a man, and I'd fired 2 shots near it to make it move, and it hadn't moved until it decided to, and then it had covered ground like nothing I'd ever watched move in a field. The guy at the desk, older, had that tired look that says he's been told everything. Didn't laugh. He didn't do anything dramatic either. He nodded slow and told me I wasn't the only one that week. 2, 3 hunters had said pieces of the same thing near other corners of the county. He didn't write anything down. He didn't stand up. He just looked at me like he was filing it in the drawer with other things a person can't do much about. I walked out of there with no more than I'd walked in with, except now the morning had the weight of being real outside my own head. I sat in the driver's seat and put my hands on the wheel and stared at the water drops still clinging to the hood. The car smelled like powder and damp. I could feel the spot on my shoulder where the recoil had bit, a dull ache that wrapped around the muscle. The inside of my cheek had a spot where I'd bitten it at some point without noticing. I watched a hawk take a lazy turn above the courthouse, and somehow that helped. Normal things functioning normally. Here's the part I can't change, no matter how I frame it. The fear wasn't the size of it, or even seeing it stand. The fear was the second shot. The second shot is the one that put the knowledge in my gut that I was outmatched in a way I couldn't fix with a firearm or a plan. It wasn't missing that scared me. It was understanding that hitting would make the math worse. That's when it became not just something weird in a field. That's when it turned into a truth I had to live with. There are things you don't push, not because you're soft, but because pushing is the wrong tool for the job. I've told this a handful of times since. I don't call it anything, because the minute you stick a name on it, people bring their own pictures to the word and stop hearing you. It was a damp morning behind an old church, a puddle in a field, a black shape the size of a nightmare doing something as ordinary as splashing water with its hands, and me playing at control by opening a trunk and holding a long gun. It stood. I shot into mud. It decided it didn't care. It went away in bounds that turned my stomach because there's a speed to that sort of stride that you don't forget. And then it was over. I drove out of that field the same way you drive out after changing a flat. You do the steps, and you don't let yourself think until the road under you is a kind, you know. And I haven't gone down that lane behind that church since. There's no big moral. no twist. Just a morning that split in two, the part where I thought bear and the part where I knew better, and the clean end where it shrugged, crossed a lot of ground in very few steps, and left me there with a loaded gun and the ugly knowledge that I was the smaller thing. It stopped right there for me. No chasing, no roaring, no aftermath, just fog and wet grass and a car door that still sticks a little because I pushed too hard on it without noticing. I still don't have a way to explain it that makes it okay. It happened, it ended, and I'm stuck at the exact moment it decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Story 9. June of 1979. East of Seneca in Grundy County, Illinois. I was 15 and thought I knew that stretch between Morris and home better than my own living room. It was one of those dusky evenings where the fields go flat and the sky pulls the last of the blue into purple, and you can still see without lights, but only just. We had been in Morris, messing around, nothing big, and headed back the usual way, windows down because the car didn't have air worth a dime, and the night air felt cooler than the heat we'd left behind on the blacktop during the day. That car had manual locks and windows that took a crank like you were starting the whole thing by yourself. Bench seat, floor mats that held onto gravel like a souvenir. The dash squeaked on bumps. The radio only picked up 2 stations unless you hit high ground, and even then it faded. It smelled like sun-baked vinyl and a hint of oil that hung in the carpet no matter what you did. I was comfortable in it because it was ours, and because that road felt like the most ordinary thing in the world to me. We pulled off on a wide gravel shoulder east of Seneca, where a little drainage ditch cuts under the road. If you know the area, it's a low place with a stand of scrub and a short run of trees that follows the ditch a ways. Fields on both sides, corn one way, soy the other, a farm light way back near the horizon if you look hard. We had stopped there a dozen times before to stretch or just sit with the engine off and listen to the night push in. I had both hands on the top of the wheel and felt settled in that way you do when the evening is almost done and you think you'll be home before the kitchen light goes cold. The first thing that made me think something was off was how my arms felt. That prickle you get before a storm. The second thing was the quiet. It didn't fall away all at once. It dimmed. The insect noise thinned like a radio turned down. The frogs in the ditch gave it up in a stutter and then shut off. I could still hear the tick of the engine cooling and a little ping from the exhaust. But beyond that, the edges of everything dulled like someone had pressed a pillow over the night. I've sat in my share of quiet spots. This wasn't that kind of quiet. It edged in and I felt it in the back of my jaw. I was about to say, "Let's get going," when the sound came. I don't know a clean way to put it. It wasn't a scream and it wasn't a roar and it wasn't a growl. It was all of those, and it was none of them. It hit with a depth I could feel in my chest, and it had a high on it that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I've heard bobcats and they'll raise your hackles, but they're sharp and short. This ran longer than it had any right to and sat in a range that made the glass in the windows feel alive. It wasn't a siren. It wasn't a person playing around. It didn't match anything you learn to assign out here. Not cattle, not a neighbor's engine spinning too high, not some kid in a field. It had a throat to it, a size. The closest my brain could do was say it felt like it came from something big enough to push sound instead of just make it. The ditch on my side of the road was a black cut, a little water holding onto the last of the day's warmth. There were cattails down near the culvert, arrowheads, and a mess of ditch weeds. Behind that, the trees made a dark wall. That's where it stepped from. It didn't crash. It didn't stumble. It stepped out of the scrub like it had always been there, and the scrub was nothing more than a curtain. At first, it was just shape, a darker shape against dark. But the way it moved punched through the shape. Long, steady strides. Not the quick staccato you get with deer when they decide the road is theirs and yours too, and they move like their feet belong nowhere. This covered ground like ground was made for it. I couldn't give you a height in feet and inches because night steals those measures, but I can say it felt too big for the road. The shoulders were out past what I read as normal. The arms hung low enough that the hands brushed near the thigh, every swing in a way that said the arms were longer than mine by a lot. It didn't hold its head up like a person. It didn't hunch like a bear. It carried itself in a way that told me it belonged on two legs and always had. There was enough light left that the slight shine of hair showed when the last of the sky caught edges. It was hair, not clothes, not a coat. Dark. Too dark to see color, but not matted in clumps. I didn't see the face. I saw the line of a heavy brow and the suggestion of a nose that didn't stick far. What yanked my stomach up into my throat wasn't any of that. It was the length of the second step. The first step could be anything for a second. Your brain argues with your eyes and offers you everything you know before it lets you take one. You don't. First step says deer, says person, says maybe it's a shadow moving wrong. Then the second step locks the picture. It hit, and my brain had to stop playing nice. The second step was too long, too sure, and too much like intent. That's the step that told me this wasn't a mistake. It looked in our direction, and the line of the strides held our line, and the talk in my head went from, "What is that?" to "It's coming to us." I didn't say "get in." I choked the words out. My hands and lungs were already moving. My friend didn't argue or ask. The sound had wiped out the space for stupid. He grabbed the handle. He was in. I hit the lock because this was not power anything. Each lock took thumb and forefinger, and that simple, dumb motion felt like the most crucial thing I'd ever done in my life. I cranked the ignition, and the starter did that long grind I had heard 1,000 times, and for the first time, it felt like it took a year out of my life. The engine caught, the whole car shook, and the speedometer needle lifted like a slow hand. That thing didn't run like a person runs. It ate the ground between the ditch and the edge of the shoulder in a couple of those long steps, and in that mess of half light and fear, I swear I saw the legs place the feet in the spots where a person doesn't think to put them, on the little bumps of ground that don't sink. It wasn't clumsy, it wasn't careful either, it was competent. Gravel spit. The rear end slid a bit because I put more foot in it than was smart. The back tires found bite, and we shot out of that spot like a deer with a dog on it. I didn't look back, not at first, because every part of my head insisted that looking back would bring it closer to my window. The sound happened again, not the same full scream as the first. This was a shorter punch of sound, like a piece of the first, and it was enough to make my knuckles go white on the wheel. The car's lights finally mattered, but all they did was paint the road into a ribbon. The ditch lost shape. The timber swallowed itself behind us. People say things about speed that sound cool when you don't have anything to hang your fear on. I'm not proud of it, but I put the needle past the point I'd ever pushed it. Past 60, past 70. The numbers are a blur, but I know where that needle lives when you're showing off, and where it sits when you're trying to outrun a noise you don't have a name for. It went past the number I'd whispered about in school in some stupid context, and I didn't care what it did to the engine. The car felt light in spots where the road dips, and my stomach did that sick float and drop. Somewhere in there, the shadows on the edge of my vision might have been corn, might have been hedgerow, might have been the thing. I kept it straight and I kept it fast, and my brain felt like it had split into two pieces. The piece driving and the piece saying nothing useful in the back of my head. I made it to wider road, the kind where the ditches fall away farther and the corn sits back and the whole world looks less like a tunnel. I let off the gas because the awful idea that I was going to meet a tractor without lights hit me, and it was the first practical thought I had since the noise. The normal night sounds dragged themselves back in. A semi-way off down a different road. A dog out there again. The feel of air through the half-open window on my left instead of on me. I glanced at the mirror then, just once, and saw only my own stupid white face and a strip of nothing behind us. I didn't relax. I don't think I breathed right until we were well past Seneca and the roads looked like roads again. We parked at a pull-in near town, where people sometimes sit and watch trains because the ground there feels like it belongs to people and not to fields. I couldn't make my hands let go of the wheel right away. When I did, I got out and leaned on the fender because I didn't want my legs deciding to forget how. My friend said nothing for a long time. He didn't need to. We were both fighting the same loop, the sound, the step, the second step, the panel of the door that felt too thin, the throttle under a foot that suddenly wanted the floor. The rest of that night was me in my room, staring at my ceiling and feeling the muscles in my legs twitch like I'd run 10 miles. No sleep that felt like sleep. No dreams that felt like dreams. Every time I drifted, that second step happened again. Not the first one you can excuse. The second one that holds your eyes and says it knows you were there. Talking about it after was worse in a way I didn't expect. People laughed because that's what they do when you bring something huge and weird into a normal day. They called it the monster of adolescence and smirked in that way that means they don't want your fear on them. A couple of older guys tried to hand me neat boxes. Bear, drunk farmer in coveralls, prank. I let them talk. I know what a bear looks like when it runs. I know where the bears weren't in 1979. And even if one had wandered, bears don't put that sound into your car windows twice and then stride like a person down out of a ditch. Drunk farmers stumble. They don't keep that kind of line, and they don't carry that kind of mass in a way that makes you feel it instead of see it. The road east of Seneca that we were on, I avoided it. If someone else drove, I white-knuckled my own jeans and counted mailboxes. If I had to take it alone, I did not stop for anything. No pretty skies, no quick breath, no dumb teenage urge to sit with the engine off and feel older than you are. The ditch that held that water, the trees that hold that corner of night. It all felt wrong, still does. What I have left of it after all these years are 3 exact things I can't shake. The quiet that fell wrong, the sound that didn't fit anything I knew and made the car hum, and that second step that told me it chose us. You can reason away the first as a trick of air pressure. You can call the sound a bobcat again and again and make it play in your head like that until you get tired. You can pretend the step was shorter than you remember because memory is a liar sometimes. But it won't take. Not for me. That step set its weight toward our car, and that changed the whole night. I don't have a photo. I don't have a hair in a bag. I have the way a noise lives in your ribs when you've been too close to a train, and that odd hum clings to you after. Only this wasn't a train, and there isn't a track there. It came out of scrub in a county I thought I knew, and came toward the stupid old car 2 dumb kids were sitting in, like it had a plan, or like we had just gotten in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it was tired of having a wrong place. I can still feel the wheel under my hands, and the push of the pedal, and the slip of the back end on gravel, and then the grip, and then just road. I wish it had ended in a way that gave me some kind of neat box to put it in. A chase would have made a better story. A clear look would have made a better argument later. It wasn't that way. It was a step, and then a second, and then our own engine drowning out everything because I needed it to. The sound didn't follow us. It stopped, just cut off. 1 second it was in us, the next second it wasn't, and there was nothing left to do but drive and hope the world was still the same a mile away. I can't explain that. I haven't been able to since. It happened, it ended, and I'm still standing in my head at the shoulder of that road with the night pressed in and the second step on a line straight to the door, frozen at that exact point where everything stops and there's nothing to do but go. Story 10. August 17th of 1979, Franklin County, Illinois. I was riding my bike near the tracks late in the afternoon, one of those heavy summer evenings when the creosote from the railroad ties hangs in the air and the weeds on the right-of-way scratch at your ankles if you drift too close. I had a used 10-speed with a squeaky rear brake and dry cables, and I took it out almost every day because I didn't have a car and the bike was freedom enough. The sun was dropping behind the trees in a way that turns every dent in the dirt into a stripe. That flat orange light that makes everything look sharp and kind of unreal. There's a cut path that leaves the ballast and runs out across an open field, more of a utility path than a real road. People use it to get tractors out to a far corner, and if I'm being honest, to dump junk where nobody will bother them. Old tires, busted furniture, whatever. I knew that path pretty well. It's a hardpan track with ruts in spots, little pocket puddles after a rain, ragweed on both sides that goes higher than your bars by August. You can follow it all the way to a gravel lane if you don't mind dodging the worst of the trash and keeping your mouth shut about who probably put it there. Right before I turned off the cinders, a couple of boys on a small moped came jittering up from behind me and blasted past, engine whining. They had that look of the thrill part of scared, eyes wide, grins big, and they were yelling. I caught, "There's a bum behind us," in the second before they were past, and the words tore off in the wind. It read like dumb messing around the way kids do when school's out and the sun is getting low. I waved them off with a shrug and kept pedaling. I was 15. Bum meant some guy sleeping rough in the trees, maybe cranky if you got too close. Not my business. The rail bed is covered in those sharp black stones that chew tires and spit them back at you if you're not careful. I bumped off that and onto the dirt of the cut path, and the first stretch always feels like relief. The ground there carries old machine oil and the plain, dry smell of dust. On the left is a low bank where a ditch cuts through. People had tossed stuff up on that bank forever. That day, there were old washing machines and dryers stacked like someone had made a wall out of them. You see that sometimes. Folks back a truck up, shove appliances off and let them tumble. These hadn't tumbled. They were sitting one behind the other along the top of the bank, tops facing the path, like they were watching it. The bank itself was just high enough, call it 6 feet above the track I was on, that you could stand under it and touch the bottom of the lowest machine if you jumped. I coasted because that's the kind of junk that will throw you if you misjudge the distance. The late sun was behind that bank, and the plane of it threw a hard shadow over the path in front of me. Dust hung in the air from the moped's track, motes glowing and then disappearing when the shadow swallowed them. I remember the smell of hot metal off the washers, even though the heat had gone for the day. That powder-coated steel holds warmth a long time. About halfway along the line of appliances, something moved in the shadow. It wasn't a squirrel or a cat, it wasn't small, it was a whole shape behind a washer, and I saw it because a shoulder shifted and the edge of the machine gave it away. The top of the washer came to my armpit at the distance I was at, maybe 10 yards out. At first my brain grabbed the sensible thing and said, someone crouched there. From where I sat on the bike, the shape coming up behind that rectangle of metal looked like a person's height getting higher, like they were pushing up from kneeling. It rose. I'm trying hard not to sound dramatic, but there's no way to say it that matches how it hit me. It stopped crouching and it kept going. For a heartbeat, I thought it was my height. My brain handed me that as a gift because it's easier to process. I was around 6 feet at that time, but right as that thought settled, the math punched me in the mouth. We were maybe 20 feet apart, straight line across air, and the machine and bank were a known stack in my eyes. The top of that washer sat at about chest height to me if I'd been standing next to it, and this thing's groin, its groin, was above the top of the machine. That means the hip line was over the washer. That means everything above that had space before you got to a head. Hair covered everything, not like a coat, like a body grew it. Dark, the kind that looks black with the sun in your eyes, and maybe would be brown if you put your hand in it. The shoulders were wrong for a person. Too wide, too full where the neck meets them. The arms hung long enough that the hands easily came past mid-thigh. Those hands weren't paws, they had spreads, they had fingers. I didn't get a clean look at the feet because of weeds and bank. but the weight of it changed the way the ground looked around where it stood. The sun was in the wrong place for me to see a face clearly. All I got of the face was shadow with movement and a flash off the eyes, like a quick catch of light on something wet and deep set under a heavy brow. It wasn't glowing, it just took the light that existed and made me see it. Everything in me went tight. It's not like TV where you think of a plan. It's a wall inside you that either lets you move or it doesn't. I didn't bolt, not yet. The dumbest part is, I didn't feel like it jumped at me. It didn't lift its feet toward the edge, like it was going to drop. It stood and made a sound that wasn't a sound I could hear so much as a body noise that transferred along the metal in the trash. A low, almost irritated rumble that I felt through my hands on the bars, like feedback in your palms. Then it did the thing that has stuck with me more than anything else. It put its right hand around a sapling that had sprung up near the bank, a skinny little tree that was only a couple inches across at best. It wrapped its hand around it above my head height and shook it, not like I've seen people shake a limb to show off, not wild. It was one single tight jerk. The trunk bowed, the leaves shook loose a little, the whole thing sprang back and wagged once. The grip left the bark with the tiniest scrapes of torn green curling. That shake read like a person's exhale after being annoyed. Not a threat, not a roar, and enough. And it was like it had reached the end of how much it wanted to deal with, and that was the boundary. My stomach turned to a fist. I didn't look to see if there were tracks. I didn't test my bravery against somebody's campfire story in my head. I turned the bike on a patch of dry dirt too fast for the back tire to hold, and it slid and then bit. The chain banged once against the frame. I stood on the pedals out of habit when you want speed in a hurry, and the cranks bit into my shoes so hard I felt the teeth through the rubber. I put my head down because putting it up meant looking up into the shadow of that bank, and I couldn't make myself do it. The route back to the tracks isn't long. It felt like a mile anyway. The cinders took the tires, and the clang of shifting from dirt to rock snapped me back enough that I could steer without wobbling. I cut right and headed toward the road, and the wind from the little speed I had got cold in my ears. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear a crash or a chase. It didn't jump off the bank after me. That almost bothered me worse because it let me leave. My legs pumped without asking me, and the world narrowed to the cut I knew by heart, and the bright spit of sun where the tracks opened up. At the road, I came up onto the pavement and coasted because my legs went watery, and I didn't trust them not to dump me in the gravel. I let the bike roll along the shoulder and dared myself to look back down the cut like an idiot because, I don't know, I needed to know if I had made it up. Back in the shade, in that slice between the dumped machines and the ragweed, it stood over the path where my tire had left a line. It didn't move toward me. It didn't step out into the sun. It just stood there, watching. That's what it felt like. Watching. As soon as I saw it, like acknowledging the look was enough, it turned without dramatics and stepped back into the growth. I don't have a memory of the exact motion after that. I know I rode. I know I pulled my elbows in tight and I could feel grease on my fingers from the chain where it had popped. I know my mouth tasted like a penny. Adrenaline does that to me, makes metal in the mouth. By the time I got close to town, the world had clicked back into its boring shape. Cars where cars belong, people cutting their grass, somebody spraying a hose across a driveway. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't want to say something that would turn my afternoon into a room where other people put their opinions on it. If you want neat details, I can give the ones that are burned in. The bark, where the right hand squeezed the little tree, thin green curls peeled down where the grip had pinched, like a thumbnail run hard under skin. The length from top of washer to where its hips sat, a bad math that my brain keeps trying to redo and finds the same wrong answer every time. The way the hair lay, flat from head to shoulder, and then a little longer along the arms and down the side. Not matted, not groomed, just there like it belonged to a body built to wear it. the eyes catching light because the sun was behind it and the whole scene was silhouette, and one little edge of light still found those sockets. What got me wasn't the height, even though that was wrong all by itself. It wasn't the fact that it was there at all, though I've walked that cut 100 times since and not found a single sign that made it feel ordinary. The part that drilled into me was that single shake of the sapling. It communicated. That's a weird word for it, but that's what it did. It told me a lot in one motion. I'm here. I can move that thing like it weighs nothing. I'm not going to. I'm annoyed you're here. Go. It wasn't a display aimed at scaring me the way a person might puff up a dog. It was more like a person flicking a table once, instead of pounding it. That split the line between curious and confident. I had walked into it thinking curiosity would carry me. The shake corrected me. Confidence wasn't mine to borrow there. In later years, when I read things about this kind of sighting, I saw people argue over how they run, or whether they throw rocks, or how their faces look. I didn't get any of that. No run, no throw, no face to study. I got a posture, a line of mass against a broken sun, a hand on a thin tree, and the sense that I'd brushed up against something that had plans and patience that had nothing to do with a kid on a bike. Maybe the boys on the moped had actually seen it and weren't just stirring each other up. Maybe that's why the engine had that strained whine when they blew past me. I dismissed it as dumb talk, because that's easier when you want your ride to stay a ride. I didn't go back down that cut for a while. I took the extra loop to the road and made myself small there, and if I heard the rasp of cicadas drop off, my hands tightened on the bars, whether I wanted them to or not. When I finally did go, months later, I stopped at that spot where the appliances had been. Someone had hauled a couple away and shoved others deeper into the brush. The little tree with the peeled bark was still there, scabbed over in scar. That made my stomach do a little flip, because scars are proof in a way photographs aren't. Quiet proof that doesn't care what you think. I can pass it off to myself a dozen ways when I want to sleep better. Some big guy with a coat, some trick of light, some bad measurement from a panicked kid. I've tried all of them, they don't fit. The one measure that refuses to blur with time is the high line of where a hip sat against a known edge and the simple physics of a hand on a thing I know the feel of. If you want a word for it, I don't have one that sits right in my mouth. Putting a label on it drags a bunch of other people's pictures into my head, and none of them are fair to what I felt. What I know is I learned something about myself on that narrow strip of dirt, borderline nothing more than a scar across a field people used to dump their junk. I learned that curiosity is thin when it meets something that owns its space. Confidence is not mine if the other thing in the scene is the one choosing the rules. A hand shook a sapling one time and I left. It didn't chase, it didn't push, it ended with me on the road, breath loud in my ears, looking back because I couldn't not, and that shape standing where my tire line had cut the dust and then turning away like I wasn't worth another thought. That's how it stopped, like a door closing between rooms. No build up to a roar, no end with a neat bow, just that little jerk of a tree, and my back tire sliding once on dry dirt while I tried to make speed out of fear. And me, years later, still feeling my fingers grind grease because the chain had popped when I shoved too hard. I don't have a better explanation. It happened in a handful of minutes on an ordinary summer evening in Franklin County, and then it ended so clean it felt like it had been edited by someone else. I'm stuck at that point right before the sapling snapped back, seeing the bark curl and waiting for a move that never came, and nothing I tell myself now changes that. Story 11. January of 1980 in Mon County, Illinois, near Garman Park. I remember the air that night more than anything. Dry winter cold that makes the house click when the heat cycles and puts a little sting in your nose when you lift the sash. I don't sleep well. Back then it was worse. I was up in the front of the second floor, standing at the window, because our 3 Beagles had set up a racket I hadn't heard from them before. Not their bored bark, not the possum on the fence tune, something urgent, deeper, with a tremble like they were torn between wanting to warn and wanting to hide. It was around 3 a.m., dead quiet otherwise. The kind of clear moonlight you get some winter nights where it's not bright like summer, but you can see every edge. Frost on the grass, just enough to silver the low spots. Our place backs onto a big field that runs down to a little creek, tucked into a strip of timber. The ground behind the house drops off gentle from the back steps, then steeper toward the fence, then a longer slope down to the creek bottom where you get reeds and mud nearly all year. Off to the right, there's an old apple tree line from whoever planted it before us. Some of those trees are just skeletons now, but 2 still put out fruit. The lower branches hang over the yard a bit. I know the reach of those branches better than my own arm, because we hang feeders and a tire swing there in the summers. The back pasture fence sits just beyond the apple trees. Past that, it's field, and then the break into the creek trees. The Beagles stayed on a chorus even when I spoke to them through the upstairs window. Usually my voice is enough to shut them up for a second. Not that night. They kept their noses tipped to the back corner where the field pinches down by the old hedgerow from the southwest. I cracked the window a little more, because when dogs have that kind of opinion about the world, you pay attention. The pain was cold against my wrist. From up there, I can look straight down the yard and catch a corner of the creek line. At first I figured it was the neighbor out with a lantern looking for that gelding that crashes through the fence once a season. He's got a history of popping wire to go find better grass. I ran through that picture fast, of a person in a coat, shoulders hunched, calling low for a horse. That idea kept me steady for maybe 2 seconds. Then the shape stepped out far enough from the hedgerow that the moon put a skin on it. It was huge. No pretending otherwise. A pale shape, not snow white, not dark. Beige-grey, like the color of a deer hide that's been left too long in the sun and dust. It moved with a weight you could read even in the quiet. I saw hair, not cloth. You can tell the difference on sight. Cloth breaks up in clean lines, seams, edges. Hair flows over, and when it moves, it ripples. The whole body was hair, down the arms, over the shoulders, along the legs. The chest and the big top part of the shoulders showed movement underneath, like muscle working. It was up on 2 legs and not fighting to be there. It didn't teeter. It didn't switch to all 4s. It walked like it owned walking. I swallowed hard enough that it hurt. The Beagles went quiet all at once, like they had run out of a reason to keep talking. That scared me more than the barking. They never go silent for long. Coyotes out in the thin timber will set them off for an hour sometimes. A raccoon on the back fence will get them screaming like a siren. This silence had a held quality, like it belonged to a bigger thing than 3 kennel dogs can negotiate. The shape angled across the back of the yard from the southwest toward the dip that leads to the creek. Slow, not hiding, not bothering. It wasn't a person in a coat. That is the thing my brain fought for and lost. It wasn't a hat over a hood. It wasn't a fur-lined anything. It was hair growing from a body. The stride had length to it that matches a body built that way. I could see the long line of the thigh muscles slide under the hair when it stepped. Not runaway length legs, just proportion that wasn't ours. The arms hung long and swung in a way that made me think of reach more than anything. There was one moment where the hand hung away from the body far enough that I saw the outline of fingers. Not a paw. Fingers. It stopped. It didn't freeze like something spooked. It decided to stop, and it turned its body a bit, not a full face turn, just enough to put me in its line. From where I stood at the upstairs window, we were almost eye level if you ran a line out from me to it, except we weren't eye level. I was on the second floor. It was out in the open. That wrongness punched me in the gut. It set its weight, kind of half on one leg, and looked. It didn't lean. It didn't puff up. It just looked. The face. I've tried to describe this to myself too many times. The face did not have hair like the rest. There was skin, pale in that moonlight, with a texture that didn't catch my eye as animal first. Not the pushed-out muzzle of a dog or the flattened middle of a bear, more like a heavy-boned human face, brow strong, eyes deep. I didn't get color. The moon, the distance, the angle, none of that would give me iris color. But I saw the eyes, and they were not dull. There was an awake behind them that never, ever belonged to any deer or cow or dog I've had stare me down. The mouth was closed, not curled, not showing teeth. The nose sat broader and flatter than mine, not long. If I say human, people grab the wrong picture, so I want to be careful. It wasn't a human face. It read closer to human than to ape. That's as honest as I can get. My first instinct wasn't to scream or run. I went perfectly still with my hands on the sill and my breath going short without permission. There's a feeling when you are the animal in the house and another animal is outside, looking right at you. You understand glass is nothing at all. That was the feeling. Except the odd part was, it didn't feel like I was prey. It felt like I was a puzzle. It was studying me the same way I was studying it. Down past the yard, the usual night voices flattened. Even in winter, something out by the creek talks. Owls, a fox yip sometimes. Once in a while, a coyote pops off and gets the rest going. All of that went thin and then out, like someone turned down a knob I could not see. The Beagles, again silent, watched with their noses pressed into the corner of their kennel, bodies stiff as fence posts. They didn't whine. They didn't rattle the chain like they do with raccoon scent. They just shut down. Time did its trick. I don't have a good count of seconds or a minute. It wasn't a blink. It wasn't a 10-minute standoff. It was long enough for my arms to start telling me I was holding them in one position too long, and for my mind to try to reassign what I was looking at 3 or 4 different ways. It finally gave that up and left me with the simple. I'm being looked at by something huge, upright, all hair but for the face, built like a hard-working man multiplied, who is standing in my yard off the field. It shifted, not like it was startled, more like, all right, I've seen enough. It turned back to its line toward the slope, and that was the first time I got a real feel for height without guessing. There's a low apple tree limb just at the start of that grade. In summer, I can loop a feeder there by standing on the second rung of the ladder. My husband, who is 6'2", can't touch it from the ground even with his arms stretched full over his head. I've watched him try. That night, the thing ducked under that branch. Not a big dramatic duck, a slide. It dipped its head and shoulder and cleared with a good foot to spare. That isn't something my brain can downgrade later. That branch has fixed my understanding of that height ever since. As it started down the grade, the weight showed more. The way the ground took it, heaviness without stomping, the shoulder muscles rolled under that beige-gray hair like the muscles under a horse's coat move when it takes the first step. The hair itself moved like hair, lifted when the shoulder came up, settled when it dropped. Not a suit, not a one piece of anything. It breathed, and the chest in that line under the hair made a small rise and fall, and that alone could have kept me frozen for a month. It broke my line of sight after a few steps, because the slope takes away the lower body first, and then the upper as it goes. No crashing into the creek trees, no big branches whipping. If there were sticks breaking, the distance swallowed the sound, or the quiet went so hard my ears quit working right. The dogs did not restart. They stayed in that small, closed-down place as if the world had cautioned them, and they had listened. I stood there longer than I needed to with the window still cracked and my fingers numb because I hadn't realized I'd pressed them flat against the cold frame. I didn't want to move. That felt like the sort of moment where if you move too soon, you change a thing you don't want to change. Eventually, I got my breath back in measure. The furnace kicked on and popped the baseboards and brought the house back as a noise. That almost irritated me, because it made the old life sound fake, layered on top of the new thing I had just watched. I didn't go outside. People like to say they would have gone out and checked for prints or gone to the fence line with a flashlight. I can tell you right now, no. I stood inside my house like a thin animal behind glass, and I stayed there. I listened to hear if it came back up the slope on the far side by the big oak. It didn't. I listened for the creek water to splash wrong, like a heavy thing stepping in. I heard nothing but the low hum of winter. At some point, the Beagles let out a breath. You can hear that if you live with hounds long enough, the moment their chests soften and a little whine leaks out without sound. Then one made a single, small, howling yawn, and the other two picked up the habit, and we bled back into living in a house with dogs again. If you're looking for me to announce what it was, I can't. I can tell you what it wasn't. Not a man in a coat. The movement betrays the coat every time. The way fabric snags on elbows and splits at seams, and the collar stands. Not a bear. We don't get them like that there. And a bear's outline is wrong for that height, wrong for that head turn, wrong for that arm swing. Not a cow. I can't believe I'm even typing that, but people will throw cows at anything tall in a field. A cow won't get up on two legs and stand at you. A cow won't set its weight like that and look interested. Not a trick of light. Light does a lot. It doesn't lay hair across a shoulder, so you see the muscles move underneath. It doesn't pull a face up out of a mass and give it a quiet look back at you. The exact terror of it didn't come from it could come through the window or it could get me. Those are normal, honest panics. What snapped me was that moment in the stare where my whole body understood that it was thinking. Not thinking like me, not thinking language or plan that I could grab, but thinking nonetheless. A curiosity without any warmth in it, an assessment. I felt pinned in that way things feel when you hold them in your palm and turn them to understand the angle. I was the thing in the palm. I was the thing in the window. I woke my husband after the heat cycled again because my legs wouldn't let me keep standing. I told him enough to make sense. Not the whole shape, not the way the face looked. Not yet. He went to the back door, opened it a crack, stood there for a long minute with his hand on the frame, then closed it and gave me the one nod that means, I believe you without saying so. He grew up with me on this land. He knows the regular shapes of the dark. He knows when they're wrong. I didn't go to sleep. The house sounded like an old animal breathing. The Beagles drifted back to snoring eventually, little huffs and grumbles. I kept seeing the dip of the head under the apple branch. That's the piece that locked the whole thing to the yard, instead of letting it drift off into the mental list I have for weird nights. That branch is my yardstick. It's where I hang a feeder. It's the branch my husband can't touch, and it had a foot to spare when that thing slid under. That night ended in a strange way. Not with sirens, not with neighbors turning on porch lights, not with any drama. It ended like someone had pinched the wick on a candle and left a little thread of smoke to say there was just flame here. The field went back to being a line of frost. The creek made its small winter sound. I stood in a dark room and swallowed around the memory of being seen. And then, as quick as a step down a slope and a duck under a branch, it was over. There's no conclusion I can offer that makes it neater. I looked into eyes I shouldn't have known how to recognize, and they looked into mine. It left. Everything went quiet in a way that felt like the world had restored itself. I still don't know what I was to it in that moment, and the part that has teeth is that I can't explain any of it. How it stood there, how it looked at me like I was a fact, and how it vanished down toward the creek like a piece of the night stepping back into itself and shutting the door, leaving me standing at the window, waiting for a sound that never came back. Story 12. Summer of 1978, Ascension Parish, out on McElroy Swamp. I was 8. My older brother was 19, and I thought he hung the moon. He and a couple cousins had this floating camp they used when the water was good and the nights stayed hot. It sat back in the swamp where you can't get unless you know the channels or you follow someone who does. No road. You go by boat or you don't go. We left right at dark, a flat bottom with a small outboard that smelled like two-stroke and old fish. The motor had a pull rope, that could blister your fingers if you got cocky and yanked wrong. I sat low and held the ice chest lid, while my brother ran the tiller, and one cousin stood on the bow with a spotlight clipped to a battery. That beam made a tight tunnel on the water, and everything outside of it felt thicker. Cypress knees stuck up like little stumps everywhere, and you had to watch your line or you'd drop the prop into a mess of roots and make a problem. Spanish moss hung, and the way it moves is slow enough to make you think twice about what you just saw. The bugs came in sheets. We all smelled like Offen river mud by the time we hit the camp. The camp itself was more a platform with a roof and one small room than a house. Built on drums and old styrofoam blocks, tied off to two big cypress with fat rope, there was a short walkway made of 2x10s to a little square you could tie the boat on and unload without stepping into the muck. The boards had that slick swamp film on them, where your foot goes sideways if you aren't paying attention. Inside the little room was a table, some hooks with pans, and a Coleman lantern that hissed like a live thing when you pumped it right. Hammocks hung under the roof, out in the open part, strung between posts and a beam. It all rocked if a boat went by too fast. If you put your hand flat on the floor, you could feel water move under you. We unloaded and didn't sit still long. They were out to frog. If you've never gone, it's simple and not at the same time. You ease along the banks and look for eyes. Frogs give themselves away with those little coins of light when the beam hits them. You reach with a gig on a pole or grab with your hand if you've got the nerve. They thump when you drop them in the sack. The boat's low so you don't have to reach over far. Every now and then you get lit back by a pair of red eyes out farther, the gators. Those sit higher off the water, and if you move the light, the shine holds. Nobody messes with those. We didn't that night either. We worked the edges slow. I sat with my fingers around the lip of a 5-gallon bucket and watched the light paint everything hard and then take it away. By the time we called it, the bucket had a good thump to it, and the canvas sack was slick with frog slime and water. We ate what we'd planned earlier, bologna sandwiches and chips and warm soda, because the ice chest was for the frogs, not the drinks. Later, someone got the lantern right, and the hiss became a sound that faded into the bugs. The sky had opened up to a big round moon with that thin haze that makes a ring around it. The water beside the platform went slick and mirror dark where the light didn't reach. Mullet popped now and then, little quick smacks. Something big rolled out there once and left a slow swirl. Could have been a gar, could have been a gator. I didn't ask. I was 8, and big things in black water are a whole other kind of idea at that age. We hung in hammocks. That's what you do out there. The thick heat becomes less of a problem if you're catching breeze under a roof with open sides. I remember the rope under my knees, the way the fabric stuck to my legs where I had bug spray on. My brother and the cousins were talking low and telling lies the way people do at that hour when you are just tired enough to say you'll be up all night. One of the cousins had brought along what he called a hunting horn. It looked like a long plastic call with a bell at the end. He said it would make an owl answer back, and he was going to prove it when midnight hit. We ended up missing midnight by a stretch. Time gets strange on a platform over water. It goes slow and then it leaps. It was after 1, by the way the air felt. The bugs had changed pitch. The swamp never goes quiet all the way, but it shifts gears. He finally stood up with that call and blew one long note through it. It wasn't a pretty sound. It was just long and steady, kind of hollow. If you've ever heard someone use an owl hooter, you know it. The note went out and slid into the cypress like a stick into a creek. We waited for the usual answer. Barred owls are notorious. Who cooks for you? Loud and proud from somewhere, and then another one joining in with a laugh like a monkey. I'd heard that before. It can spook you even when you know it's a bird. What came back wasn't an owl. It came once, a single thing. I feel stupid trying to put words to it because I'm going to write the wrong words and you'll think you can put it in a known box. It started low enough that I felt the boards under me catch it. Not a hum, not a machine, a chest. The sound ran through the barrels that floated us and into the water, and back into my bones. But it had a high on top that didn't break. Most things scream and they shred the end. This didn't. It held, thick and high together. It felt like it built inside the swamp and then snapped into being right next to us. The hair on my arms stood. The lantern flickered once, as if the air around it changed. The rope that tied us to the cypress twanged against the cleat like something had moved the water sideways. I looked at the face of my brother because a kid looks for an adult face when something impossible happens. He didn't look at me. He looked toward the sound with a tight mouth, and his head tilted the way dogs tilt when they need more information. The water right next to the platform made those quick, tight rings you see when something big hums near it. People talk about gators making water dance when they bellow. I've seen that. A gator's bellow is so low, your own chest decides to copy it. It's like a boat engine idling wrong under you. This sound wasn't that. The bottom was there, but the top slice was up in a place owls and cats live, and yet it didn't belong to either. It didn't sound like pain. It didn't sound like anger. It sounded like an announcement. All the small life sounds backed up, like someone took a step backward across the whole swamp. The crickets pulled it in. The nightbirds took their turn at being quiet. Even the far highway noise that sometimes lays like a thread across the night seemed to duck out. The call filled the space where all that had been and didn't make room for anything else until it stopped. No one on that platform said a thing. The cousin with the call lowered it. He didn't blow into it again. Maybe he wanted to. Maybe he didn't trust his hands. Mine had gone pins and needles from gripping the edge of the hammock. My throat had the feel you get when you've held your breath too long and your body wants to pull in air and you keep telling it, not now, not yet. The scream, not even a scream, I don't have a better word, didn't come again. It had made its peace and left, as simple as that. We listened like people do who have used up the last of their explanations. I ran through everything I had filed away in my 8-year-old head for swamp noises. Owl? I know barred owls can make night feel like a street fight. That wasn't this. Great horned? They sit heavy and hoot, and when they do other noises it's short and mean, not long and held like a note from a horn. Coyote? Coyotes have the yip wail, and even when one rolls out a longer sound it crinkles at the edges. Bobcat? A bobcat scream will put you to running, but it tears itself to pieces coming out. It doesn't vibrate a platform under you. Puma? Folks argue about whether there are cougars, and I don't want to wrestle that here. I've heard a recording of a cougar cry since, and it sits on another shelf in your head. This sound sat on 2 shelves at once. The water lapped back in the way it does when a boat goes by, and the waves hit you a minute later. Only no boat had passed. We lay in that night, and I discovered you can hear your own heartbeat through a hammock strap if you're quiet enough. I had this feeling in my stomach like I used to get before a whipping or a hard test I didn't study for. Not about being in trouble, about being small under something you don't understand. I didn't cry. I didn't have room in me for even that. I was full from my chest to my throat with a simple knowledge. It was close, alive, and nothing I could name. A mullet popped, then another. A nightbird tried a single note and thought better of it. In the distance, a heron gave that ugly crank call they have, and that actually helped because it was exactly what it always is. The cousin set the call down slowly, like he didn't want to make a clack noise on the boards. The lantern hissed and did its little mantle tremble and came back into itself. The rope going to the cleat lay quiet again. I watched the tie knot because it gave me something my eyes could hold without needing to be brave. Nobody went to grab a flashlight and sweep the water. I'm sure in other people's stories that's what happens next. Someone gets loud because fear turns into talking when you're older. We weren't those people in that moment. There's a kind of fear that tells you loud is the wrong move. That's where we sat. Even the big cousin who liked to brag about grabbing frogs with his bare hands kept his hands to himself. The smell of the swamp shifted a little, the way it does when something heavy moves water in the dark. Not fish, not rot. A bright green smell of cut plants bumped up for a second and then fell back into the usual stew of wet wood and mud. I heard something. Far enough out it could have been a mile, and could have been 200 yards, step along a bank and make a solid plant squeak scrape and then nothing. The sound did not seem interested in being heard twice. I don't know how long we lay like that. Long enough for the hammock to dig a line across the back of my legs I could still trace with my fingers the next day. Long enough for the bugs to get brave again and then get lazy. One of the cousins finally let out a breath loud enough to count as a sentence. The others let the rope go out of their shoulders, and you could see the tension leave like a ripple. The water out past the posts slid and caught a bit of moon, and didn't care about us at all. I learned something in that exact stretch of night I hadn't learned in church and hadn't learned at home and couldn't get at school. The place you think you know makes other noises when you aren't the main thing in it. The swamp is loud with normal. It's louder when it takes it away and hands you one thing instead. That one thing was enough to build a lifelong itch in my head I can't scratch. We didn't row out and chase it. We didn't stand up and make a speech about what we'd heard. Eventually, somebody made a joke not worth remembering, and somebody else pretended to sleep, and I stayed still because moving felt like I'd be tapping a glass in front of a thing I couldn't see. The call didn't come back. It had been once and done. I don't believe everything happens for a reason. I think that night was what it was, and then it left. I know people will want there to be a wrap-up, like I should say we saw something on the bank or we found prints in the mud the next morning. I'm sticking to the night. That one call, the water shaking under me without wind or boat to excuse it, the way the whole swamp stepped back for a breath and let something else take the room. 2 weeks later, back home, the TV had a little piece on the evening news about drivers on the interstate near our section seeing something cross in the lights, heading into the same swamp. They said, "creature," because that's what you say when you don't want to pick a fight with your own words. I remember standing with a dish towel in my hand, staring at the set and feeling my mouth go dry. An explanation would have felt good. I didn't get one, and I don't have one to hand you now. It was one summer night on a floating platform, only a boat can find, under a moon that kept a ring around itself like a trick light bulb, with my brother and 2 cousins too tough to spook, until something in the trees decided to talk exactly once. The sound made the floor alive under me, pressed my chest from the inside, and cut off clean like somebody yanked a plug. The frogs took a breath and came back. The lantern hissed. The rope lay flat. I lay there with my palm on old wood and knew there was a big breathing thing close enough to shift the water under an 8-year-old boy. And I don't know what it was. It happened. It stopped. And I'm still stuck right there at the edge of that single held note, waiting for a second that never came. Story 13. 1978, Grant Parish, Louisiana. I grew up sleeping outside more nights than not. My family hunted and fished and camped like it was church, and I loved the sound the woods make when you kill the last flashlight and let your ears take over. Crickets in the grass, frogs swapping jokes over the water, owls punching the quiet with those rude calls. I trusted those sounds like you trust a porch light. They tell you what's normal and what isn't. That night taught me how fast normal can leave. It had rained all afternoon, the thick kind of rain that turns a red clay road into gumbo, that will suck a boot off and swallow the front axle of a truck. We had driven in on dry ground the day before, but by evening the 2-track we used to get into our camp was a trench of black soup with standing water in the low spots. No way out without a tractor, and no tractor coming that night. We knew it before the sun even thought about dropping, so we made the best of it. We had the good spot, high enough to stay firm, a little hump between a pine stand and a strip of low swamp with cypress knees and a lazy black ribbon of water snaking through it. We had a canvas wall tent, One of those heavy old things that smells like wax and mildew, no matter how long you hang it in the sun. The ridgepole sat between two pines, and we'd stake the guy lines into sandy spots that didn't want to hold until we hit a root. There was a fire pit made right, ringed with rocks we'd hauled from the creek on a different trip, half buried and settled so it didn't kick ash everywhere. A coffee pot sat on the grate with that burnt smell it gets by evening. We'd eaten early because rain makes you hungry. Sausage and beans in a blackened pan, bread toasted on a stick, hot and soggy at the same time. You don't complain. You wipe your hands on your jeans and call it good. It was just me, my grandpa, and my uncle that night. They were the kind of men who know the woods like a second house. The kind who can pick squirrel out of a tangle of oak leaves by ear and tell you where hogs have been from a whiff of turned dirt. They didn't scare easy. I watched them a lot when I was younger because their faces told me when to think and when to run. That night they were more quiet than usual. Not scared at first, just listening like the rain was telling them where it meant to push us. When the rain finally quit and the heavy drip started, off the pines, off the palmettos, off the tarp we strung to keep a dry spot, the normal chorus came on strong. It's how the swamp celebrates getting its throat wet. Tree frogs all together like 1,000 tiny bells. Crickets so loud you can feel the noise sitting on your skin. Something big rolled in the slough once, just a boil that traveled out and slapped the cypress knees. We joked about gar and gators earlier, but as the dark got old, that talk died the way it does when you're fixing to sleep. The air smelled like wet pine straw, mud, and the leftover smoke that creeps into everything. Mosquitoes loved it. You could hear them whine outside your hood and feel them press through the fabric until you slapped them into a mess. The road was gone to us. We knew we were staying whether we wanted to or not. The trucks were parked in the one dry strip under the pines, noses pointed toward the ditch, like that would mean anything if we tried to leave. You don't win against that kind of mud. You only wait. It started with a sound I didn't have a place for. I've heard panther cries in the night. They sound like a woman with something stuck in her throat, all torn and sharp. I've heard hogs rutting, loud and ugly, like someone sawing metal under a tarp. I've heard coyotes do that cackle that makes your hair stand up because they sound like crazy people. This wasn't any of those. It hit and it kept coming, lower than a scream and higher than a roar, long enough my gut knotted because my ears said it should have stopped already. It was a chest behind a voice, not the other way around. It carried like water does. It was close enough to feel on the soft skin under your jaw, and not so close that it pinned your chest to the dirt. I caught myself holding my breath like I didn't want to disturb it. Then it stopped, and the night went weird. The frogs shut up like someone had walked into a room, and they were waiting to see if they needed to apologize. The crickets wore out the last notes in their throats and went quiet too. The only thing that kept going was the drip off the trees and the little hiss from a hot spot on the fire. That silence felt like somebody had taken the world and cupped a hand around it. I looked to my grandpa and uncle out of habit. Men who don't scare easy were not making jokes anymore. My uncle had put his hand on the shotgun without looking at it, not like he meant to shoot, but like it belonged where his hand needed to be. My grandpa's mouth had drawn down into that line he got when he counted in his head, not fearful yet, measuring. We listened. The sound came again, not in the same place. To the left this time, just past the palmettos, deeper into the strip of swamp that runs behind our little rise. Then a sound like brush opening, not a raccoon push, not a hog herd. Those sound like a sloppy burst. This was steady. You could hear weight, and you could hear choices being made about where to put that weight. The brush parted at a shoulder height that isn't mine. Each step had a little snap on the end of it. That's a sound you learn when you've spent a lot of nights outside. The sound of vines and small saplings giving way. These weren't big cracks like a pine getting pushed. These were wrists breaking, quick and clean, at a height I would have to reach up for. It kept moving, left and then behind us, then to the right. Not fast, not in a rush, a circle. The worst part wasn't the sound itself. The worst part was hearing it and knowing the road was a lie that night. We could leave camp and get exactly as far as the gumbo and then dig ourselves into a deeper hole. My stomach did that slow turn like it does when you realize the only door is the one behind the thing you don't want to cross. That's the part that took my breath more than the first scream. I could have talked myself into a cat if it had stayed in one place and screamed. Cats have territory and stubborn ideas about claiming it with their voices, but this didn't claim a spot. It claimed a circle. It would let loose, long and too smooth for a bobcat. Then you'd hear brush ease back. Then you'd hear that little sapling break and leaves drag. Then it would call again from a new angle. The interval between snaps and calls did something to me that I still can't shake. It turned the night into time counted by twigs. Snap, 3 steps, breath, snap. Fear had a metronome and I was stuck in its tempo. I ran through everything I knew about critters because that's what your brain does. It tries to assign something it can file. Hogs, big, loud, mean. They announce themselves in packs and you know it. This wasn't a pack. It was solitary and deliberate. Coyotes, they will circle to test things, but they chatter the whole time and they don't break saplings at shoulder height one by one like that. Human? There's a stupid part of your brain that always wants to say, it's just a man messing with us, because that's easier to fix. But I have been messed with, and I know the sound of stupid humans. Humans bump around, humans step wrong, humans giggle at the wrong time. This was none of that mechanical clatter. It placed weight like someone who knows how to disappear until they don't. We couldn't leave. There's no hero move in mud that'll eat your front tires. We had canvas between us and whatever was out there, and 2 old trucks that wouldn't save us from spinning in place. My grandpa put another log on the fire and it spat in the wet. He did it slow, like he didn't want to surprise whatever listened. The light bounced off wet bark and made the palmettos blink. The glow jumped and I could see the steam rise off the log like breath. It came closer once. Close enough that I heard a different kind of brush noise, the scrape of a palmetto frond across something that didn't yield, it didn't rush. Closer, then pause, then the long sound again, aimed just past us. It wasn't shouting at us. It was more like it was letting the woods know where it was while it made its round. That's a sentence that sounds like I'm trying to make it wise. I'm not. I'm trying to say it didn't feel like aggression the way hogs feel like aggression, or the way a boar will stiff-leg stomp and chatter his tusks. It felt bigger and more patient, and it had us counted. Once my uncle took a step toward the edge of the light with the shotgun at a lazy carry, like he might put his shoulder into thinking about it. My grandpa gave him a look that took him right back. He didn't argue. He slid his boot back like the mud rerouted him. Men who hunt all their lives know when you make yourself smaller. That was that moment. We didn't huddle. We didn't rush for the trucks. We sat in the light and let something bigger draw a circle around the dark we had. A stick popped right behind the tent, not the little pop, the kind that comes from a dry branch under a boot heel. The canvas breathed toward the sound and then settled. That took the last of my extra air. The worst part about a wall tent is realizing you are a breath and a thin sheet away from the outside, and that your zipper won't buy you a second if something wants in. I stared at the dark stripe of canvas like it might give me a heads up, like it could show me a shadow. It gave me wet canvas smell and a slow drip down a seam that hit the dirt. We did not talk. We did not play brave. I could hear my uncle's boot leather creak whenever he shifted his weight. I could hear my own tongue click against the roof of my mouth when I swallowed wrong. My grandpa's breath went slow and even on purpose. That was a gift because my own breath kept trying to run away. If I glued mine to his, I could pretend I was calm. The scream, call, whatever that sound was, kept circling. It would travel away enough for my shoulders to loosen, then the next brush break would be on the other side, and it would get its money's worth out of my spine again. I don't have the right markers for time from that point. I know the sky had that milk to it that comes late at night when clouds thin out after a storm. I know I checked the side of the tent where the ground dips 3 or 4 times more than I needed to because my head insisted that's where something would stand if it wanted to look in. The fire went through its stages because a wet log makes you work for it. The coffee pot clicked and then went quiet. Somewhere deep in the swamp, the small voices pushed their luck and let a few notes leak back. The big voice did not care. It set the pace for the night. Close to dawn, I only know because the tree line started to change from black to shapes. The sounds slid away, not in a dramatic fade. They just moved down cove, so to speak, farther and farther out, like someone walking the trail to a different job, until the long sound went thin, and then there was only brush noise. The brush noise blended back into the thousands of small brushes that are a swamp, and then the crickets came back like somebody hit play. Frogs committed again, loud and dumb. Birds took the first shot at pretending morning was just another morning. The world got busy with itself. I never heard a splash that made the hair on my neck go up. I never saw a flash of anything big between trunks. It just stopped being our problem. We waited longer than necessary to make the morning safe, because safe is a lie you sell yourself, and we were good customers. My grandpa put the coffee back on like his hands needed something familiar to do. The first light catches pine bark weird after a night like that. It makes it look slick and new. The mud down the lane had a skin on it, and you could tell we weren't leaving until the sun had the time to bite that top layer and pretend to harden it. We finally stepped out of the ring of last night and walked the edge. If you've slept in the woods long, you know most mornings show you signs you missed in the dark. We found them. Down along the slope where the palmettos thin and the ground gives, a line of small trees were bent and broken at a height that puts them above a man's reach when he's just walking. Not snapped like a windstorm, bent down and broken, and in a few places twisted enough that the fibers didn't line back up. Sap bled fresh. Every few yards, the grass and cane lay down like something heavy had pushed through without getting on its knees to do it. At a little open patch, where the mud was more bottom than top, there were impressions you could argue with if you wanted to be difficult. They weren't plaster cast pretty, but they were too long and too wide for anything I've ever hunted. The heel, if that's what you call the back part, dug deeper than the front, like weight had rolled forward on purpose. My boot sat inside one and had room to laugh at me. I remember the oil from the mud pooled in the bottom, that rainbow sheen you see after rain. My grandpa stood over them with his mouth in that same line he had the night before. He didn't name them. He didn't need to. They said what they were without asking for claps. We found where the brush had opened and then eased back. You can always tell the difference between something tearing a path and something making room and moving through. Vines lay off the edge like somebody had lifted them and set them back. A little palmetto frond had a rip clean across at about the height of my shoulder. My uncle touched it and looked at the wet edge of the tear. New. That's what his eyes said. New. We ate what passed for breakfast with the taste of old coffee and wet smoke in our mouths. We waited on the sun to do whatever it meant to do with the road, and then we got out of there the slow way, feathering tires along the highest bits, feeling the truck lurch and catch, lurch and catch. The rest of the day looked like most days. Errands, chores, talk about weather with people who didn't sleep under a tarp the night before. If that sounds unremarkable, it is. That's what happens after the most remarkable thing in your night. The morning makes you wash dishes anyway. I've had folks try to give me easy answers since. Panicked hog, neighbor messing with us, a cat with a lungful of air and an attitude. Fine. People need drawers to put things in. I know what hogs sound like when they circle. I know how people step wrong on cane. I've stood under a barred owl when it makes you think the whole world is a throat. None of those break saplings at 6 feet as they walk a ring around your camp and then leave marks in mud that laugh at your boot. The part that has stayed the longest isn't the sound. Although sometimes, when the dry cane out back of my place snaps in a steady rhythm, the hair on my arms remembers before my head does. It's that feeling of wanting to go and knowing you can't. It's watching two men who taught you the woods sit inside the edge of the firelight with their hands where hands belong and decide that sitting still is the only right move. It's counting those snaps as if they were seconds and realizing that fear will give you a beat to breathe if you pay attention, and that you are stuck breathing on its schedule, not yours. I didn't make anything big out of it then, and I'm not now. It was a night on a small rise in Grant Parish after a rain when a dirt road turned into a joke and something with a voice I can't name took a slow walk around us while we did the math on our choices and found none. Before daylight, it let the swamp have itself back. We stood up stiff, found what it left behind in broken saplings and big flat marks, and we got out when the mud said we could. That's the end. It didn't charge. It didn't knock a tree over. It didn't tear the tent. It drew a circle and we sat in it. And then it was gone, just like that. Snaps fading out into the wet, frogs turning themselves back on like nothing had happened, and me stuck right at the point where the last twig broke and the world went back to normal as if there wasn't a different normal 10 minutes before. I still can't explain it, and it still feels like it ended mid-step and left me counting a beat I can't forget. Story 14. Summer of 1979 in Vernon Parish, Louisiana. I was 5. That's the detail that makes adults shrug, but I remember that day clean in a way that doesn't fade. It's the kind of memory where the small pieces stick, the way bark felt under my palms, the squeak of my wet sandals when I walked on the hot driveway, the way the air had that baked green smell that comes off the ditch when everything is alive and sweating. We lived at the ragged edge, where the last line of houses pressed up against the woods. You could stand in our yard and see chain-link fences and propane tanks, and then, 2 steps beyond, the trees were a wall that swallowed sound. There was a creek, more a drainage ditch than a real creek, running shallow between the houses and the first rows of pines. A big tree, maybe an oak, maybe a sweet gum, had fallen across it months earlier and turned that spot into a bridge. The bark was ridged and flaked in flat chips. Under the bark, the wood felt smooth and dry, and then slick if the underside was still damp from the water. It angled gently across the water and made a path to the other side where the brush thickened quick. We all used it. Older kids made it a game to run across without touching the water. I wasn't allowed far into the woods, but nobody stopped me from climbing the log and shuffling across to the far bank and back. It felt like a tightrope in a circus that belonged to me. Earlier that afternoon, I sat there on that fallen trunk and watched a family of opossums walk the same bridge. I'd never seen them that close before. The mother moved steady and didn't hurry. Babies clung to her back like a pile of grey marbles with tails and little pink ears. The last one almost slid off near a spot where the bark was slick, and I remember tensing my own fingers like I could help. They didn't make noise. That stuck with me even then. The only sound was the little scritch of claws and the creek making a slow green sound underneath. Somewhere in the other direction, toward the road, construction noise drifted in and out. Bangs and the hollow thuds you get when someone drops lumber on a driveway. Voices too far away to make words, the steady beep and grind of equipment. That gave the day a background rhythm. It made the quiet at the creek feel like a hiding place. The heat was real. You could feel it lifting off the road and pushing under the trees. Afternoon in Louisiana has a weight to it that makes your eyelids feel thick and your shirt stick to your back. I remember the smell of honeysuckle from a fence down the block, sweet and high, mixed with the low, muddy smell of the ditch, mixed with the sharp sap smell that lingers on your hands after you pick at pine bark. I had a plastic cup that used to be red and had turned pale from too many dishwashings. I used it to scoop water and pour it on a damp spot on the log to make dark shapes. Then I'd wipe it with my palm and do it again. Other kids were somewhere behind me, near the cul-de-sac, doing bike things. Tires in gravel, a whoop now and then. A dog barked once at nothing, and then remembered it was too hot for that nonsense. An adult across the way started and stopped a lawnmower twice, and then gave up. The insect noise was up in that diesel engine range and never stopped. From where I sat on the log, the woods started as a wall of green and then turned into grey-brown trunks and dark slots once your eyes adjusted. Palmettos filled the space between the trunks. Vines knotted through them. There were places where the ground was open, but mostly it was a tangle taller than me. The far side of the log where I let my feet dangle was a little shelf of dirt where the bank had slumped and made a spot for ferns and thin weeds to try their luck. If I leaned back and looked to my right, I could see the backs of houses and the shimmer off metal trash can lids. If I leaned forward and looked to my left, it was sticks, leaves, and the kind of shade that eats the color out of a thing. I saw it because it moved wrong. That's the line I didn't have as a kid, but that's what it was. Something moved in the thick green ahead of me, and it didn't move like a dog pushing through or a person nudging aside branches with their hands. It didn't test a step and then shift. It didn't weave to find a gap. It came straight. At first, it was a shadow that didn't match the light. Dappled sun made patches on the leaves and trunks, and the shadow moved through those patches without a hiccup. It kept its mass the same. I didn't think anything helpful like man or animal right away. My brain tried to turn it into a shape I knew and couldn't paste it onto anything. It was a dark, full form from head to feet, and it was running, on two legs. That's the thing that finally forced a word into my head, running. My world had a lot of two-legged walkers and four-legged runners. That thing closed distance like the undergrowth was an idea it didn't care about. Everything about how it moved said the ground didn't matter. It didn't hop over palmettos. The trunks didn't slow it. It didn't charge down an open strip or follow a deer path. It kept its line through greenbrier and the knee-high tangles where you and I would end up pinned and cursing with vines wrapped around our ankles. I didn't hear anything. That might be the worst part of it in my memory. No grunt, no crash, no leaves tearing, no steady breath like you hear from a person running even a little ways. The undergrowth bunched and relaxed as it passed through, and that was the only proof that it had mass. Covered in hair. That's what I saw next. Head to foot, not the shaggy mats you see when a dog jumps in a pond and then rolls in dirt. Hair that lay in one direction and moved as a piece when it moved. Dark. In that light, I'd call it black. Maybe in full sun it would have gone brown, but I didn't get full sun. Arms swung, not wild, not like it was trying to make a show of size. Hands, not paws. Long in a way that made me think even then it could touch the ground if it wanted and didn't. At 5, everything is tall, so I won't pull numbers for height. It was bigger than any person I knew, and bigger than the man who carried our new fridge down the front steps earlier that spring. The proportions didn't match any person I'd seen in work clothes. The chest was wide, and the narrow part at the middle didn't look soft. The head didn't bob. It held a level the whole time. The legs moved in a smooth roll, not high knee, not high step. Each foot placed and pushed, and there wasn't a stutter in it when a root crossed or when the palmetto leaves laid flat and wanted to slap back up. I looked for a face without meaning to. That's what we do. We try to find eyes. I didn't get a clean face. The hair muddled it, and the light was wrong. I had the sudden, pure knowledge I'd been seen anyway. There's this quiet inside you when something notices you. It's like a drop down an elevator shaft, stomach trying to climb into your throat. It hit me, and I forgot about making water shapes on the log. I forgot about my cup. My hands went cold, even though they were sticky with sweat. The distance between me and the line of trees wasn't far. 2 living rooms laid end to end, maybe. The time between seeing a dark mass and understanding it would cross that distance quickly was a blink. I don't know if it locked its root on me, or if I happened to be in the route it already had. I know it didn't drift left or right to find me. It didn't pause. It didn't cock its head. It just came, straight over the kind of ground that makes adults pick their way and kids sit on their butts and scoot. I thought, person in a costume, for exactly one split heartbeat, because that's a thing a kid thinks when something is head to toe in hair. Then I watched the feet plant and push in a rhythm that no person can keep in that mess, and the thought fell away. A person would lift their knees, get caught, stumble, yank their leg free, shift around a trunk, step high, and then overcorrect when a vine bites. They would snap branches and make enough noise to chase every bird in 2 miles. That didn't happen. The thing moved like those woods were a tiled floor with tape marks on it, telling where to put a foot. Right foot, wait. Left foot, wait. Constant. There was no scream. No smell slammed me in that way some people tell it. I know swamp stink. This wasn't that. What I remember is the lack of sound, even the bugs thinning for a second in my ears. Even the construction noise sneaking in from a block away felt like it had turned its head the other way. A second stretched out, like someone pulled it long. I turned and ran. It wasn't brave, it wasn't planned, it wasn't thought. My body did it. I whipped my legs onto the log and sprinted the only way I knew how at 5, too fast for my own coordination. The first steps were heel-toe thump on old bark. The slick spot where the opossum nearly slid got me too. My foot skated sideways and my knee hit bark, and I felt the skin go at the same second as I felt the breath go. I grabbed at the top with my hands and the ridges bit into my palms like teeth. Splinters went in. I didn't care. I made 3 more steps and I was over the muddy bank and on the hard dirt where the grass looks like it's tired of being trampled by feet that don't pay attention. The heat felt like a wall when I popped out into the sun, but the distance between that and the nearest back doorstep had never felt as long in my life. Gravel grabbed at the bottoms of my sandals and one strap slapped wrong, so the sole folded under my foot and then flattened again. I heard nothing behind me but my own breath and the high wires of the insects. No pounding steps, no crash, no grunt. If I had heard a noise, I think my heart would have burst. The quiet was worse. My brain tried to make shapes in the corner of my eyes as I ran. Dark pieces of shade in each yard, a garbage can lid propped against a fence, anything, but I didn't look back. I hit the screen door with both hands. It gave and banged the inside wall in a way that would have gotten me yelled at any other day. The cool air inside smelled like pine sol and damp dish towel. My chest hurt in that sharp way that comes when your body can't organize breath and your side decides to stab you to protest. I stood there and listened for the world to tell me what to do next. Nothing did. No thud against the house. No dog exploding because something awful had got into the yard. No neighbors shouting. Just the normal small clatter of a house living its life. When I finally pulled my head out of the space between my shoulders, I had sap and dirt stuck in the skin on my knee and lines in my palms that had to be teased out later with a needle. My plastic cup sat on the log where I left it. I could see it through the window that looked over the yard and out toward the ditch. It was turned on its side, one edge hanging off just a little, like a first step dropped in a panic. My mouth was dry like I'd eaten chalk, and there was a taste of metal where I'd bit my lip without noticing. I peeked through the glass and half expected to see it standing on the spot where the grass turns to dirt. But the space was empty. Palmettos on the far side shook once, like a hand had passed, and then stilled. The humid air outside wavered in its heat. Someone revved a car on the street beside our block, and the noise felt too normal for my own insides. The construction equipment hit its beep again in the distance, a slow backing up beep, and that dumb sound made me want to cry, because the world had decided to be boring without asking me whether it was allowed to. I didn't go back to the log that day. I didn't go as far as the edge of the grass. I didn't tell the others to follow me inside, because the scream wasn't happening, and it would have felt like I was making it up if I tried to make them see nothing. I noticed the dog 2 yards over lifting his nose, and then laying his head back down on his front legs, like he had made a decision I wasn't allowed to hear. I turned on the kitchen tap and let it run until the water from the hose under the sink ran cool enough to not taste like metal pipes, and I gulped it, and it came right back through my open mouth onto the front of my shirt in a cough because my body wasn't playing nice yet. Later, much later, when I let someone go with me to the edge and I stood with toes on the hard dirt and looked both ways, the only signs were the tiny dumb ones that mean nothing to anyone else. The ferns at the bank that made the little shelf were pressed down unevenly, like a big foot had slid and then not slid, like the earth had decided it would take weight from a direction it wasn't used to. A fresh, palm-sized scratch on the smoothness of a sapling's bark on the far side, right about where a thigh might have rubbed if something had come close. Nothing that would satisfy an adult looking for proof. Enough to make a 5-year-old go in and sit on a tile floor and decide the floor wasn't going to move under him. The terror wasn't because of a roar or an ugly face or a smell that knocked me. It was that run, that silent, clean run through a place that steals your ankles and your respect when you try to move too fast. People like to say, someone in a suit. I didn't have suit back then as an idea, but if you're asking me now, I can tell you what a person can't do in that tangle. A person cannot run straight through palmetto and vines and root balls with a long, sure cadence and keep their breath quiet and their feet from making noise at that speed. I know what it looks like when a person tries. They lift their feet high, vine catches, head drops, arms go out like windmills, mouth pulls in air like they're trying to drink it. This did none of that. It didn't even break stride where the palmetto fans change angle and want to shove at your shins. I didn't sleep badly that night, weirdly. I didn't take the memory into a dark room. It stayed pinned to that hot afternoon, that log, that line between houses and woods. Sometimes I think the heat baked it into the day so hard it couldn't slip to any other. I ended that day inside, hearing ice clatter in a plastic pitcher and knowing the cup I had left outside would still be there in the morning. Life kept moving, like it always does, which is maybe the worst part when your insides haven't caught up yet. I don't have a perfect end for you, because my end happened the second my hand hit the cool side of that screen door and the world dropped the moment like a hot pan. No one else saw it. No scream announced it to the block. No smell walked through our kitchen. It ran, I ran, and the day went on. Decades later, if I close my eyes, I can still see the way the undergrowth didn't slow it. That's weird to say, but that's the truth. I see that constant cadence and the way the vines gave, like they knew what they owed and nothing more. I can still feel bark give under my knee and splinters nest in my palm and the weight of the quiet at my back where a sound should have been and wasn't. It happened fast. It ended clean. And I still don't have a way to make sense of how something that big can move like that, straight through the kind of mess that eats people without a sound. I'm stuck in that second, with my cup falling and my feet turning, and the quiet coming on like a hand over my ears. Then nothing, just heat and a doorway, and the knowledge that something saw me and came anyway, and I can't explain that, not then, not now. Story 15. 1979 in Webster Parish, Louisiana, almost dusk. The kind of heavy air that sits on your shoulders and smells like lake water and cut grass and bug spray. Our house sat right on the edge of a long, shallow lake, with cypress knees that rose like blunt stakes near the shore and lily pads that took over any quiet corner if you let them. We had a wood deck out back, rough boards that grabbed splinters if you walked it barefoot, and a short set of steps down to the yard and the dock. There was always a small rattle from the tin roof of the little boathouse when the breeze came off the water from the south. I grew up with those sounds stitched into evenings, frogs throwing noise from the reeds, crickets soaring away in the grass, a bullfrog way off doing that single deep note like a bass drum. Those sounds were my gauge that everything was fine. They're how I measured normal. We had a German shepherd then, He wasn't a pet you trusted with chickens or the neighbor's cat. If a raccoon made the mistake of walking our fence line, he'd be a different kind of dog by dawn. We kept him on a run when he was outside because he thought everything that moved was a challenge. Fearless, I would have said back then. Loud, fast, happy to throw himself at any problem head first. I never saw him shy from anything on four legs. That evening, it had been hot enough all day that the metal latch on the screen door warmed your skin when you touched it. I remember leaving a glass on the rail and seeing a ring of water bloom on the wood as the ice melted. Before the sun fully dropped, the bug zapper on the corner of the deck popped now and then. Little blue zings that felt like punctuation marks in the rhythm of the frogs. My mother was in the kitchen with the back door propped open because the house held heat like an oven. We didn't have air that did more than push hot air around in June. She'd made Meaver dinner, nothing fancy, just enough that you knew when somebody cracked the door the smell went out and slapped the deck. Right in that thin slice of evening, when the sky goes from yellow to orange to grey and the lake stops pretending to be anything but black, she mentioned how quiet it felt. She wasn't a dramatic person, so it landed odd. I heard it too before she said it, like somebody had rolled the volume down on the world 3 clicks and we were waiting for the punchline. Crickets that had been steady chatterers cut back to a thread. Frogs fell off their chorus mid-phrase. The drip from the boathouse roof stopped. Even the mosquito whine near my ear seemed to back off. I was standing at the sliding screen, fingertips on the metal frame. The quiet itched. It made the hair on my forearm stand up, even though sweat was still running between my shoulder blades. My ears rang a little like they do when you turn off a loud machine, and the emptiness comes on so fast, your body inserts a hum to fill it. I could see the surface of the lake from there, flat, with just a little oil of movement, where duckweed clumped at the edge. The bushes to the right of the dock were still. Spanish moss lay in grey loops off the cypress and didn't stir. I didn't realize how much I depended on that background until it left. Then the dog hit the back steps. I know the sound of his claws on those boards like I know my own heartbeat. It wasn't the usual clatter. It was a scramble with panic in it, nails scoring the wood. A full-body slam into the screen door that rattled the frame and banged the hook latch against the jamb. He yowled, this choked howl he never made unless he'd been hurt, and dug at the bottom edge with both front paws like he was trying to peel it up. I saw hair standing straight up along his back and his eyes white around the edges. I've only seen that on a dog a few times in my life. It looks wrong on a dog that usually thinks he's king of the yard. My mother reached for the handle without thinking, and the second the latch lifted, he blew past her. He knocked her backward with his shoulder hard enough that her hip hit the doorframe. He didn't even look behind or check in with me like he normally would when he came through and knew he'd made a scene. He went for the hallway at full speed, paws skidding on the linoleum like a cartoon, tags clattering, and then dove under the bed in the back room so fast he rattled the box spring. He wedged himself in way at the back and went silent. A dog like that doesn't wedge himself under anything unless he thinks the world is ending. My mother stood up with a hand on the door and the other braced on the counter, eyes flicking from the open dark to the hall. The screen door swung and creaked twice, and then stopped. The air felt wrong. I don't have better words. The kind of wrong that makes you press your lips together because you don't want to breathe too loud. It was all right there at the threshold. The lake, the yard, the dock, and that thin slice of porch light hitting the top of the steps. All extremely ordinary, and the rest of the world had been turned down so low, it felt like we had gone underwater and didn't know when we'd run out of air. The scream came from the lake. It wasn't a person. It also wasn't any animal I could put a name on even now. The closest thing my brain could grab in the first instant was the sound of a woman sobbing hard in a tile bathroom where everything echoes, pulled together with the low throat of a big cat rolling a growl around. But it wasn't either of those. It rolled out across the water long enough that the sliding glass panel thrummed in the frame, and the deckboard under my bare foot trembled. The hair on my neck prickled so hard it hurt. It didn't wobble, didn't break into bites the way a bobcat will do when it gets going. It held like a single long note, full and ugly, and then dropped off like someone had cut a wire. We didn't move. The only thing in motion was the breath in my chest that refused to organize. I could feel my heart hammering behind my ribs, and I could feel my mother's hand press against my shoulder without actually grabbing it. The lake held the echo in the weird way water does. It wasn't a real echo. It was more like the water absorbed the top of the sound and handed you back the bottom late. Then we heard steps in the water. Not the neat little lapping noises fish make, not the tiny plips of turtles, not the quick splashing of a nutria spooking and running tail first. These were heavy, a placement, a suck, a push, slap, pause, slap. The slow body sound of something big choosing where to put weight on a soft bottom and not hurrying. You could hear the water shove under it and then rush back. Not splashing exactly, more like big hands pressing on the surface of a drum. It was shallow along our bank, that mucky shelf of knee-deep that goes out a ways before the bottom drops, studded with cypress knees and strands of green stuff that cling to your ankles. Whatever was out there was in that, and it wasn't fighting. It was just moving through it like the way you or I would in boots up to our calves if we knew exactly where the holes were. The steps moved left to right along our stretch of shore, out past the dock and down toward the point where the lake narrows and the bayou pulls it off toward the spill. The weirdest part for me was seeing almost nothing while hearing everything. The porch light threw a small yellow triangle on the top of the stairs. The rest was moon glow and dark. I might have seen lily pads tip and settle. I might have seen a line of ripples traveling, but that could be my head filling in blanks I want to fill. The sound was the truth. Something big was in that water, taking its time. Not circling, not coming closer, just walking a line like it had that mapped out before I ever knew about it. My mother reached for the screen and eased it too, like she could make the world smaller by sliding a piece of mesh into a track. The quiet had a pressure to it that made the small scratch of the door hook into the eye feel like a slam. We stood with the screen closed and the big door still open because, what? You don't want a door between you and whatever you need to run from, but you also don't want air to touch your skin any more than it has to. It's funny the things your body decides for you with no vote. The steps kept right on until they got far enough down the shore that they made less sense to my ears. A fat minute, maybe less. Time refused to help. Then they weren't there. No more slap and pull. No pushing. No flinch of pads. The lake in front of our deck went back to being a flat shape with a line of black trees cutting the horizon. That's when the real wrongness snapped into focus for me. Silence broke like thin glass. It didn't edge back in. It came back all at once, how it always had been before, like somebody had a hand on a switch the whole time and flicked it up without ceremony. Crickets nailed their rhythm again. Frogs committed fully, loud and messy and proud of themselves. A heron way across let out an ugly crank like it had been holding it and finally decided to let go. The bug zapper gave a good, healthy pop and glow that felt normal enough to make me breathe for real. It was such a sudden return that I laughed once, too loud, not because anything was funny, but because the world had decided to pretend nothing had happened and my head couldn't catch up. The dog stayed under the bed. Not a whine, not a click of tags. He had turned himself into a piece of furniture back there, and he wasn't coming out to play, along with the idea that normal had come back. I remember hearing the ceiling fan chain in the back room tap metal, because the air moving through the house had changed. I don't know why that sound lodged in my brain like proof, but it did. If chains are tapping, the house is breathing again. My mother closed the big door then, careful like she didn't want to drag the moment back. We stood in the kitchen, and the room felt too small for what had just been touching the edges of our yard. I took 2 steps to the sink, and 2 back to the door, and 2 to the fridge, because I didn't know where to put my hands. She turned on the backlight proper, the one that throws hard on the steps and across the first patch of grass, and we both looked out to the deck like expecting a footprint to have burned there. Nothing. Wood and rail and someone's towel forgotten, and the empty ring where my glass had been. We didn't walk out onto the decking. I'm telling you that because people always swear they would have. Maybe you would. We didn't. We stood inside the door and looked like we were watching for a late guest and didn't want to be rude. The lake stared back blank. If there were ripples left or lily pads starting to right themselves, I didn't see them in a way I trust. All I remember is the feeling in my legs loosening in stages and the slow, prickly sensation coming down the back of my neck. It wasn't even the scream that stuck. It was how fast the life had cut out and how fast it reversed. Life doesn't turn off all at once. The swamp doesn't coordinate a silence, except it did. I know how this reads. People who didn't grow up on a lake will line up explanations. You name them, I've heard them. A gator, a bobcat, a woman down the point yelling, a trick of acoustics, somebody on a boat we couldn't see messing around. All fine, but gators don't scream like that. If a big one bellows, it makes the skin on your arms buzz, and the sound is more belly than throat, more tremor than tear. Bobcats rip the night in chunks, and theirs is a sharp thing that doesn't sit on the water like a blanket. A person can scream a lot of ways, but I know the difference between human lungs and a something that has weight behind whatever it's doing. And I have never heard all the frogs and crickets and night noises go so hard to zero and then come back like a switch was flipped, except that evening. I don't know what scared me more, that the scream existed or that it stopped the world for a handful of minutes. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. The clock was useless to me. Standing there with my fingertips on the screen and the smell of lake and fried food mixing in the doorway, I understood that silence can be a warning as hard as a sound. It hollows a place out, and you feel, or I did anyway, you feel a thing moving through that hollow that doesn't want light. It ended right there. There wasn't a second scream. There wasn't a shape stepping up onto the dock or a splash on our bank or a log bumped up against the pilings. The big sound left down along the water and the night turned itself back on, and it was like we'd dreamed a piece of it, except for the way my hands shook when I finally reached down to pick up the glass I'd left and found I couldn't trust myself not to drop it. The dog did not come out until much later, and when he did, he moved like an old animal, slow, quiet, head low, like whatever was in him that thought he could win. Every fight had been knocked out with one long sound from the lake and some heavy steps in the shallows. I've tried for years to make a story out of that evening that ends neat. It doesn't. It's not a story that wants a tidy line. It's sandal feet on rough boards, a fearless dog turning into a shadow under a bed, the world going dead quiet like something had pressed a finger to its lips, a scream that didn't belong to any shape I can bring to mind, and the slap of big feet in water moving away down toward the skinny part of the lake. Then, just like that, the switch back, the frogs loud and stupid again like they'd been told to carry on, and me still standing with my ear trying to hear what had taken the sound, and decided to give it back. I can't explain it then or now. It was there, turned everything off, moved on, and left me stuck right in that gap, where the noise came back like nothing had happened at all.